You're stuck in traffic, heart racing, blood pressure through the roof. You finally reach the office. The awkward hellos, revolving doors, your first caffeine fix of the day, and then back in the car. 15 minutes later, you're home, where the real work happens. Going home before the workday even starts? It's happening all over the world, and it's driving some of the richest bosses crazy. Why? And does it mean the office as we know it is dying? I'm Josh, and on today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're asking, what is the future of working from home? There's a phenomenon known as coffee badging. It mostly shows up in technical and professional roles, jobs where people are expected to come into the office. In the US in 2023, that meant about 70 million, roughly 44% of the entire workforce. So, a lot of people. The short story is that coffee badging is a long-lasting side effect of the global pandemic. It's about showing your face and flashing your badge to your boss or to the admin, and it looks like you're at the office all day. But really, you're back home doing exactly the same work you would be doing if you were just stuck in a cubicle. For the person doing the hustle, no harm's been done. They'll say they're just as productive working in their SpongeBob underwear as they are in a shirt and pants. So what's the problem? Bosses versus workers, the battle for the office. The truth is, many of the world's biggest business owners just aren't on board. Statistically, no one who works behind a desk these days wants to be stuck in the office 5 days a week. A 2024 poll by the remote job website FlexJobs found that 51% of respondents said ideally they'd want to be fully remote. They want to avoid the office completely. 46% of the other respondents said that they'd prefer a hybrid model, a little bit of office, but 2 or 3 days working from home. An estimated 100 million workers globally work this hybrid model right now. But will it become the norm? Statistics show barely anyone these days wants to be chained to a desk. According to the Future Forum Pulse survey, only 7% of employees who responded wanted to be at the office all week long. What happened? People weren't like this 10 or 20 years ago. As we said, it was the pandemic. It rewired our brains. We think differently, on average, about work. A Gallup poll of about 400,000 American office workers from 2019 to 2025 showed that the number of people who actually have a best friend at work has severely declined. It's gone from 22% in 2019 to 17% for hybrid workers. It's leading to an isolating disconnect in company culture. Fewer corporate staff right now believe in the mission of the company than they did in the past, especially younger people. Rates of anxiety and depression at work have also increased. They spiked during the lockdown period, but have remained higher than in the relatively halcyon pre-pandemic era. Workers just aren't as satisfied as they used to be. Maybe working from home will solve the problem. It's complicated. Some argue the exact opposite, saying workers would actually be more satisfied if they spent more time with their colleagues. That's what many of the older bosses believe. When it comes to coffee badging, they aren't exactly thrilled about their staff hustling them. At worst, it can look like wage fraud, and no matter how you slice it, it is a clear breach of company policy. It's not just a handful of rogue employees. Coffee badging is huge. When a LinkedIn poll asked nearly 1,500 workers if they'd ever done it, 19% said they or their colleagues are habitual offenders. Another 31% said they'd done it at least once. In another survey, this time of 2,000 Americans, 44% admitted to the occasional coffee badging in 2024. That was down from 58% the year before. Why the change? Well, it's not usually a fireable offense, but companies are sick of it and they're cracking down with the corporate whip. A survey in 2025 by Resume Templates of 849 managers said that 47% of their firms said that they will start firing people or at least take disciplinary action against them if they don't comply with their return to office or RTO orders. For staff, there's a kind of safety in numbers. If everyone breaks the rules, you've got a revolution on your hands. Companies can't fire everyone, but not everyone does it. And a lot of companies right now actually want masses of their staff to resign. You heard that right. Some companies have admitted they've introduced RTO to get rid of the weak links. The people they've determined are the company riffraff. It's called quiet firing, and it's all about making work so miserable that you quit on your own. Sure, it is kind of unethical, but firing people can be stressful and costly. Quiet firing is from a cheap man's playbook. It's something a lot of businesses do. In a 2025 survey, a massive 53% of firms admitted to quiet firing tactics. Staff wanting to work remotely was a major reason. The bosses think they're smart, but it's backfired for some. According to a study of around 3 million professionals, the recent RTOs have led to a 14% increase in turnover, with women leaving at a 20% rate. Some of the most senior staff, managers, mentors, innovators, and generally people with the most formidable skills left at an increased rate of 18 to 19%. While RTOs and quiet firing might have weeded out some of the less dedicated employees, the real tsunami of departures has also swept away the true diamonds in the rough. That is a lot of risk. So why do the bosses care so much about you being in the office? The answer is not all of them do. It might depend on how deep their eye wrinkles are or if they've developed jowls. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, jowlless millennial and Gen Z bosses are much more likely to allow their staff to work remotely than their haggard boomer or even Gen X counterparts. In a 2025 survey of 8,000 U.S. workers aged between 20 to 64, the picture became very clear. Younger firms run by younger bosses do a lot more work from home than older companies. Since the bosses of the near future will all be millennial and Gen Z, does that mean that we'll all be working remotely a decade from now? Maybe, maybe not. People change when they get older. They might become like Mr. Jeffrey Preston Bezos, age 62, a boomer. Boomer Jeff is one of the biggest employers in the world and was a stickler for monitoring his staff. When Amazon isn't surveilling employees' productive capacity at its fulfillment centers, it's introducing employee performance management practices. In 2024, Amazon unleashed tracking policies that will tell managers how their corporate staff are moving about in physical locations. Staff themselves now have individual attendance records, a badge report on an internal HR dashboard. For home-loving Amazonians, that means one thing: goodbye coffee badging. The company recently fired about 14,000 corporate staff for many different reasons, but there's still another 350,000 or so left. They were all ordered back under the new RTO policy. It's now a case of 5 days a week in the office for most, or being put out to pasture. Managers were told to terminate anyone defying the mandate. It's Amazon's way or the highway. 30,000 employees have signed a petition against the order, but this could just be a convenient way to offload the perceived slackers. The president and CEO of Amazon, Andy Jassy, explained that getting people back to the office is all about productivity and culture, which go hand in hand. You can't have a culture if you don't have any constituent parts in the same place. Amazon says when staff are together in the office, it brings more energy, connection, and collaboration. Was he right? An Amazon employee didn't think so. Writing on an internal message board, they said that the only thing that should matter is metrics. If the bottom line is healthy, why should it matter where you choose to work? Companies care about profits, not connections. But do you need one to achieve the other? The staff says no. Jeff and Jassy disagree. Something similar happened at Samsung. After it initiated a 5-day RTO policy in 2025, it reported to the media that the hallways of its offices were full of smiling, happy people. Everyone was having a ball, which is probably why the company later reported that it had introduced a compliance tool for managers that would be able to monitor all office staff. This would make sure their employees were meeting their commitments and not coffee badging. The media has talked about a silent revolt at these big firms. RTO has gone down like a glass of sour milk. It was the same at Google. Most of its 120 to 140,000 US-based corporate staff didn't take kindly to being ordered back into the office. 58% of those staff are between 20 and 30, the age group that is mostly against RTO. "We don't like being micromanaged like school kids," wrote a staff member who was told his remote days were over. Google said anyone who disagreed with RTO was clearly not on board with the company values and strategy. Get in line or leave. This has been happening all over the corporate world. In a study, 93% of business leaders said they believe that office-bound staff members are better for the company than full-time workplace fugitives. Some have been flexible, though, asking for only 3 days in the office. Some staff members have said that is 3 days too many, and the same study said 8 in 10 companies said they've lost talent due to their RTO policies, but they're not backing down. Like the Paramount CEO Dave Ellison, they believe that without the office, you can't run a firm. Working from home or in the office pretending to be busy? Take a quick break and make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We won't tell your boss. In the same study, 41% of workers who had been given an RTO order said that they would start looking for other work. 14% said they were already on their way out. Goodbye, Google. Adios, Amazon. They just didn't care. It was like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. But why? People have now tasted remote work and they really don't want to go back to 5 days in the office. Some are young. Remote is how they started. No pandemic, no problem. But it happened and life changed, maybe forever. Staff have complained that RTO is toxic. They're not happy how they're being treated. Morale is low. It's so low that there's another new phenomenon. It's called revenge RTO. Staff are now embroiled in a passive-aggressive revolt. You've already heard about quiet firing. Well, these revolutionaries are now quiet quitting. They're taking long lunch breaks, leaving early, and doing the least amount of work they can get away with. They know they'll get fired sooner or later, but so what? It's like a corporate petty squabble that keeps escalating. It's a large part of the workforce, too. Forbes cited a survey that said 28% of respondents said they'd expect quiet quitting to happen where they work in 2025. It was called the top career trend that year, and experts said revenge RTO is becoming the norm as the oppressive in-office mandates take hold all over corporate America. From the staff's perspective, their bosses just don't seem to care about their well-being. Everyone is burned out. People are depressed. The big question is, have they had it too easy? There's a theory in economics that says when people earn enough to live comfortably, they might choose more leisure instead of working harder. In other words, once survival is guaranteed, motivation can wane. That's one of the arguments, one that says Gen Z is over-entitled. In a survey of 625 U.S. hiring managers, 45% said Gen Z was the hardest generation to work with. An article in the Wall Street Journal by Susie Welch caused a firestorm when she said Gen Z wasn't just difficult, but unemployable. The criticism is widespread and not just in the U.S. Entitled, lazy, spoiled, unreliable, petulant, oversensitive, delusional, even narcissistic. The insults kept on coming from almost all corners of the corporate world. According to the critics, the reason Gen Z doesn't want to work at the office is solely down to those negative traits. Gen Z might disagree. Fair or not, many companies now face a corporate catch-22. Employees don't want to come to the office, while managers argue productivity and collaboration decline if they don't. Neither side is willing to budge. There is seemingly no solution. Or is there? Productivity, happiness, and the cost of work. If the bottom line isn't affected, then the RTO enforcers are clearly just being petty. Ask a freelancer if they got more done working in an office for a wage or when they were paid piece rates. There's usually only one answer. In a study conducted in 2004, people working piece rates were 20% more productive than people on fixed wages. It wasn't office work, but the principle is the same. What does the increased output tell us about productivity? People are capable of much more if they're incentivized. You need teamwork for most big firms, and in many jobs it's hard to measure performance, so you can't make everyone freelance. Workers want predictable wages too, but you can still offer incentives. Some companies are doing that. 20% of firms in the survey said they would pay their office staff more than their hybrid staff. 76% said the pay would be the same, and only 4% said remote staff would get more. Conversely, in other studies, employees said that they'd take a pay cut of between 5 to 25% just to work remotely. Back to the big question, does remote work make people less productive? If it does, and the bottom line is negatively affected, bosses have every right not to allow it. The answer is, it's complicated. A recent study found that remote work led to a 10% reduction in productivity compared to on-site work. This was research conducted by the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, and it was backed up by another research paper by the National Bureau of Economic Research. Its findings must have given CEOs nightmares. It suggested that remote workers were a huge 18% less productive than office workers. But, and this is important, the research also showed that people who preferred working from home were generally less productive than those who preferred working in the office. Maybe the boomer and millennial RTO purists have a point, but not so fast. One of the largest studies on hybrid work showed some very different results. When the multinational Chinese technology company Trip.com ran a trial of almost 1,600 professional employees, people working remotely were as good as anyone else overall. 395 managers and around 1,200 non-managers took part, from engineers to staff working in the finance and marketing departments. They were all chosen randomly based on their date of birth. In the trial held in 2021 and 2022, some worked full-time in the office and others did 2 days a week at home. While this study was done in China, not the West, the jobs in the company were very similar to what you'd find in Silicon Valley. One of the more shocking revelations was that quit rates for remote workers dropped by 35%. There was also massively improved job satisfaction for the hybrid crew. And bigger still, there was no difference in performance ratings and promotions. The hybrids worked just as well as the non-hybrids. Productivity was reported as being maintained or even slightly better. The upshot was that many of the managers at the company were said to have changed their outlook on the effect of hybrid working and productivity. But each company is unique. They have their own culture, products, and tasks. So the hybrid model would have to be tested to see if it works. The studies saying remote work is either good or bad for companies need to take variation into account. Likely productivity will just stay the same. That's what the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco said in 2024. After conducting a study with various companies, it concluded that for some firms, quote, remote work neither hindered nor helped raise aggregate productivity growth. It's also about the individual. Some people work better alone than others. But at a company, it's unfair to treat people differently if they perform the same roles. If the company did, it could face discrimination lawsuits. Another thing to think about is remote staff can actually be beneficial to a company's costs. Firms will save on electricity bills, equipment, water, and food. If you have hundreds or even thousands of staff, those bills can quickly rack up. According to Global Workplace Analytics, U.S. companies collectively could save over $500 billion, more than $11,000 per employee, a year on reduced costs of real estate, utilities, and turnover of staff who leave because of inflexibility. And it's good for the environment, too. An article in the Cornell Chronicle said working from home 2 to 4 days a week could lower an employee's carbon footprint by 11% to 29%. The future of work, hybrid, AI, and creativity. But if there was one factor that ran throughout all the studies, it was this: working from home either a few days a week or all the time improved job satisfaction. It's not hard to understand why when you look at research in the 2020s. The average yearly cost of commuting in the USA was just under $8,500. It's also a lot of time given that people on average commute 239 hours a year. They also spend money on food and snacks, items that might be a part of the groceries at home. Forbes cited data that found U.S. workers spend on average of $50 per day when they go to the office. That is $1,000 a month if they work full-time. As for cars and parking costs, 76% of Americans drive to work, another 9 to 11% carpool, while roughly 4% use public transport. In New York, it's more like 55%, the most in America, followed by Washington, D.C. at 37%. Many New Yorkers pay $132 for a 30-day Metro card. But it's also about well-being. A study said 40% of Americans would prefer to clean their toilet over commuting. The stress of driving to work for years on end, say in LA, is possibly stressful enough to lower your life expectancy. Happiness matters, stress matters. Research by Oxford University in 2023 showed that there was, quote, a casual link between happy workers and a 13% increase in productivity. CEOs, take note. Gallup's 2023 State of the Workplace report said that unhappiness at work costs companies around the world $8.8 trillion in lost productivity. That's about 9% of global GDP. People become disengaged. They stop wanting to impress their bosses. They work badly and then eventually they just quit. Simply put, working from home makes people more content. There is more data to prove it. A global survey led by Cisco, comprising 28,000 full-time employees, revealed that having the ability to work from home made 82% of workers happier. But let's ask a serious question now. Are you really happier working from home, or is your brain just telling you that? Because there is a downside to working remotely. Anyone who's done it a lot will likely admit it. Great relationships can be forged in the office. You can make friends for life. Some research says we might spend close to 81,400 hours of our lives on average at work. Spending all that time alone instead means that we could become a lot more isolated. Gen Z doesn't need more isolation. Countless studies say they are, on average, less sociable than generations that came before. Statistically, they suffer from more social anxiety. They go out less, they party less, and they have less sex. Many have grown up addicted to devices, which can be absolutely catastrophic for mental well-being. Sometimes it feels easier to be alone. There's less risk, less effort, but we all know that making the effort can greatly improve your life. The people you meet at work can transform your existence. It's all about getting out of your comfort zone. Spending all of your workdays alone in front of a laptop might make you feel happier in the short term, but it'll very likely worsen your state of anxious isolation. In the realm of positive psychology, a good workplace culture can give your life meaning and purpose. You have a shared sense of belonging. Team building can help with your confidence. Pecking orders, while sometimes negative, might teach you how to be resilient, how to navigate through difficult storms. It's all about personal growth. If a company has a positive work culture, it helps with that growth, but it also boosts morale. Engaged workers statistically take fewer sick days. They also statistically stick around longer if they have colleagues they admire or at least get along with. As a team, they come up with more ideas. In short, your happiness in their culture is very important to you, and it's also good for your company's bottom line. Yes, this contradicts all those people quietly quitting and leaving because of RTOs. The onus then is on the companies to make going to the office a positive experience. If it isn't, that's on them. The last thing a company needs is a high turnover. Staff leaving all the time can get expensive. Training new staff takes time, and if they don't stick around, it sends a clear message to customers and clients: your company probably isn't doing so well. In the future, companies will likely find a balance, creating a pleasant office culture while still letting staff work from home some of the time. CEOs and managers might discover that asking for 5 days, like many companies are doing right now, is too much. Staff might go where they can work just 3. Hybrid is surely the future. But that's the near future. What about 25 years from now? According to the Global Survey of Working Arrangements, which looked at college-educated full-time workers in 22 countries, people worked an average of 1.6 days per week at home in 2022. That dropped to 1.33 days in 2023 and then to 1.27 days in 2024 to 25. But importantly, that is still far more than before COVID. That same study said English-speaking economies had more work-from-home days on average, from 1.5 to 2 days per week. That's compared to 0.5 to 1 day in the Asian nations that were studied. Europe seems to be the most flexible. In the Netherlands, Ireland, Finland, and Germany, a massive 69 to 77% of corporate staff at least work some of the time at home. Cyprus, Greece, Croatia, and Portugal were the lowest. The US at 26% of workers being fully remote and 52% working the hybrid model is also quite flexible overall. Companies of the future will have to adapt. There's also a good chance they'll adopt a 4-day working week. Iceland has tried it and reported an overwhelming success. Productivity wasn't diminished. A number of companies around the world, some in the UK and Japan, are also running trials of a shorter work week. Reports so far are mixed. Kickstarter said staff just had to fit more work into 32 hours. The mobility company Bolt said productivity actually increased. So, the future will likely be hybrid and maybe a 4-day week. The bigger question is, when AI systems get more advanced, will work become so easy that we can just sit back and let the robots handle all the hard stuff? Could the working week shrink to just 10 or 20 hours? The answer is almost certainly, no. We're more likely to simply be expected to produce more stuff. Companies are competitive by nature. They're under constant pressure from investors to extract as much productivity as possible from their workers. That's a fact of life even if they don't have investors. History shows us technology rarely gives workers more free time. Since World War II, productivity in advanced economies has multiplied several times over, yet the standard work week hasn't fallen much below 40 hours. For a real-world example, a recent study by MIT and Stanford found that customer service workers using generative AI became about 14% more productive, but companies didn't use the technology to give them longer breaks. They just expected them to handle more work. In other words, if AI cuts your workload by half, you probably won't spend the rest of your afternoon at the beach. You'll just be expected to do twice as much. The artificial intelligence revolution may mean that computers and other devices become the new factories and mills. The Harvard Business Review recently said just that. AI is making work much more intense. It's likely the Gen Z, Alpha, and Beta bosses of the future will embrace better working conditions for staff. Labor rights haven't gone backwards so far. That's mainly because of activism. The industries of the past actually fought to keep child labor and grueling shifts. But things change from generation to generation, and as you've seen, Gen Z wants people to enjoy their work more. They've been criticized for entitlement, but labor activism has been great for humanity in the past. When they're the bosses in 2050, they'll likely provide the comfort that they once demanded for their own staff. But is a total workless future even possible? It's true that machines are going to become incredibly sophisticated. Many jobs will go, certainly jobs that don't require a human touch or a kind word. But what about creatives? Will there still be writers who tell you stories and animators who bring them to life? Will there be narrators who are music to your ears? What about an editor to tell you the pacing is off, or if you've exhausted a point, like maybe right now? Actually, it's highly probable that creative work will greatly expand for humans, just as we have already seen on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Substack. The creator economy barely existed 20 years ago. Now, just about everyone wants to become a creator. It was worth around $250 billion in 2024, and some estimates suggest it could reach $500 billion by 2027. 2050? Maybe almost everyone will be creating or helping create some form of content to earn their future crust. Now, you're thinking, surely AI will take some creative jobs away. That's what some people have been saying. Not necessarily. Some researchers believe that as AI-generated content becomes more common, audiences will get tired of it and crave authentic human voices much more than now. The World Economic Forum has argued that in the future, skills like creativity, originality, and emotional intelligence will become more important, not less. People will crave a voice in the message, something that feels human, feels real, authentic. AI will help with creations, but it won't take over completely. The consumer may become more sophisticated too. When audiences are flooded with algorithmically optimized content, they'll probably learn to recognize the tricks. We're already seeing this with complaints about AI slop online or streaming shows that feel engineered purely to trigger dopamine hits. When everything feels manufactured for engagement metrics, people will want something less generic. Let's face it, if AI optimizes everything to sound and look the same and everyone can use that software, consumers will demand something different. They'll want unoptimized creations. Right now, this is being called the authenticity premium. It'll very likely be more important as we head into the future. And that's where you come in, the future creators. In 2050, your imperfect authenticity could be like gold dust if you know how to release it. It's not an original prediction either. People have been saying it for decades, even centuries. People like the economist John Maynard Keynes, or Karl Marx, or Bertrand Russell predicted machines would eventually do all the hard work. They said people might only work maybe 6 to 15 hours a week. They could spend the rest of their time pursuing creativity, philosophy, art, and leisure. They were a little optimistic. But maybe we just haven't got there yet. Maybe it's still coming, when people like you guys are the creators in the next 20 to 50 years. In a world of AI, our humanity may become our most valuable commodity. There's another possibility, the dystopian one, where there's mass unemployment and extreme inequality like never before. That is a long story, but the simple fact is, social chaos is not good for wealthy people's business, so it's unlikely the world will spin out into a giant mass of jobless gloom. At least we hope not. Even if AI actually creates a world of abundance, there will still be competition, status, and hierarchy. Human societies have always had this. We are not equal. We never have been. We will strive in the future because that is what evolution demands. Even in a world where basic needs are easily met, we still compete for recognition, influence, and prestige. But we might take better care of those who cannot work or get left behind. Millennials are dying. Literally, and no one seems to care. This generation, constantly criticized by boomers and mocked by Gen Z, is quietly struggling to survive. In 2019, millennials aged 25 to 34 hit 128.8 deaths per 100,000, a number not seen since the mid-90s. Then COVID pushed it past 180. Why is this generation facing a crisis no one talks about? What made millennials this way, and who or what shaped their struggles? I'm Josh, and on today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're exploring the psychology of a millennial. Whether people like it or not, millennials are shaping the world. With 72.1 million of them now outnumbering the baby boomers, their impact is impossible to overlook. There is some other good and unexpected data points about millennials. They are the most independent generation in history, not just in recent decades, but in recorded history. 2025 data by Solston shows, contrary to what the boomers, their parents, might think, millennials rank extremely high in self-reliance and autonomy. In other words, they don't just go with the flow, they carve their own path. It makes sense. They're the only generation left in the office who can use the computer without assistance. But a lot of other things in their lives aren't going so well. And it started before they even got to high school. Baby boomers came into the world and the economy under completely different circumstances than millennials, and that created a disconnect. They thought that if you worked hard, you would work your way up, make good money, buy a home, and start a family. And that's just not the reality for their children. In 2022, nearly 16% of millennials still lived with their parents, and at that time, the youngest millennial was already 26 years old. Let's say that you are a 32-year-old millennial who's moved back home with your parents. Over the past year, you've sent out 500 job applications. You started with positions in your field, and then you tried one somewhat related. And now, you're just sending applications to anything that pays. And the worst part? You are a month away from seriously considering an OnlyFans account. Your father doesn't understand why you can't just go introduce yourself to someone at the company, say you're looking for work. 62% of his generation agrees with that tactic, compared to only 40% of millennials. Boomers stayed at the same job an average of 10 to 15 years. Millennials, well, they're lucky to get 3 to 5 years at any one company. Living together also means bringing two very different psychologies under the same roof, especially when it comes to their actual psychological state. Millennials are much more open about their emotions, their struggles, and are not against seeking help. In 2021, a survey of 2,000 Americans, 45% of millennials said that they're willing to seek therapy. Baby boomers? That number barely reached 8%. And that was in a survey taken in the middle of a pandemic, when you would assume that people might need help. Perhaps this co-living arrangement is part of what has created such friction between the millennials and baby boomers. It's not just a media narrative. Associate Professor Felix Danbold of the UCL School of Management found that these two generations express a lot more animosity toward each other than anyone else. But while boomers worry that millennials' values will upend their way of life, millennials are worried about something much more practical. They see the older generations refusing to leave their jobs or sell their homes, and it's blocking millennials from building their own future. The result is real tangible damage to their careers, finances, and opportunities. The difference in viewpoint might explain why millennials are so open to addressing their issues. They were raised with a boomer tough-it-out mentality that didn't really help anyone in their family. So today, they try to actually work on their mental health. And they're gonna need a lot of work, because the era millennials were raised in did some serious damage to their psychology. Imagine it's 2003, you're a millennial just starting high school, your body is changing and you're feeling a little self-conscious about it, pretty normal teenage stuff. But in the 2000s, when most millennials were just teens, something went wrong. Media, society, and even their own families didn't just notice their struggles, they amplified them and made them 1,000 times worse. In the early 2000s, the heroin chic look of the 1990s had fully taken hold in popular culture. In magazines and TV shows, most women had basically become skin and bones. The consequences were real. Rates of eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia skyrocketed. According to a study by Zhao and Encinosa, between 1999 and 2000 and 2005 and 2006, eating disorder hospitalization exploded. This was especially noticeable among millennials, then in their preteen, teen, and early 20s. Hospitalizations increased 18% for people aged 12 to 19, 19% for people 19 to 30, and 119% for those under 12. An entire generation was under attack. Millennials grew up with some of the most distorted body images of all time, and that hasn't changed for many of them. In a 2020 survey tracking body confidence, the least confident group of women were millennials. Women aged 25 to 34 rated their body confidence 37 out of 100. That is barely half of a failing grade. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the psyche of a generation that once thought avocado toast was an investment, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. It makes our writers feel slightly more like adults too. If constantly fighting your body to stay skinny wasn't exhausting enough, millennials would get their first taste of another mindset that would haunt them for life: hustle culture, otherwise known as the road to burnout. You're a millennial in 2006, you're just about to graduate high school, your parents, your guidance counselors, the entire world is telling you college is not only important, but necessary. You might even be the first generation in your family to get a university degree. You start applying to the best schools you could get into, and then it happens. You get accepted to your dream school, and then you see the tuition. Your jaw drops. Maybe you can pick up some extra work to cover it. Maybe not. Not so fast. One study found that from 1988 to 2018, tuition at private colleges increased by 129% on average. The more affordable public school options, those skyrocketed by a massive 213%. In the past, people could use the salary from a summer and/or part-time job to pay off their tuition costs. That wasn't really the case for most millennials by the time they got to college. Guess it's time for a loan that will in no way, shape, or form affect your future.
After all, that degree is gonna get you a job making some serious money, right? Right? Not for most millennials. One study found that by the age of 35, 17% of baby boomers had followed a path through college to a prestigious and well-paying professional career like law or medicine. At age 35, only 7.3% of millennials had done the same. That is less than half. So why aren't millennials making their way into high-paying careers, worsening their psychological load? Well, because the system has made it almost impossible for them to do so, creating the awful hustle culture that quickly became psychological burnout for most. And why are the millennials burning out? They entered the job market during one of the worst recessions in recent memory. Jobs on the ground were scarce, entry-level wages were relatively low, and people were grateful for anything they could get. Kellogg School of Management professor of strategy Nicola Bianchi studied the conditions that produced the millennial grind mindset. His work gives us an idea of just how hopeless the job market was for millennials. If you were entering the job market in 2010, good luck to you. The global economy fell into a hole. Unemployment among your generation is around 12 to 19%, according to the Pew Research Center. Even though you have a bachelor's degree in economics, you are paying thousands in loans every month, and all you can get is a job in retail. It pays the bills, sort of. After a couple of years, a position at a company that's actually related to your field opens up, and then boom, you get the job. Just grind for a few years and you can start moving up the ladder. But soon you'll notice that you're not moving anywhere at all, and neither are most of the people around you. Why? The recession and its after effects created a climate in which the boomer generation became more hesitant to retire from their senior positions. Moving up the ladder became more difficult than ever. The result was a mix of hopelessness and endless grinding. It is the defining struggle of the millennial generation. It also makes millennials more likely to change companies and careers. They're less optimistic about the perks of company loyalty and corporate America in general, but they do work much longer and harder to try to make ends meet, and they make a better case for their own path forward. So contrary to popular belief, millennials aren't lazy and blowing all their money. They are overworked and poorer than other generations. Worker productivity has increased rapidly from the time of the boomers in the workforce to today. Between 1979 and 2021, average U.S. worker productivity increased 64.6%, but wages only went up 17.3%. Oh, and your 64-year-old coworker at the office is being paid way more than you. In fact, more than you'll probably ever make anytime soon. Between 1979 and 2018, the wage gap between workers over 55 and those under 35 increased by 61%. That's not just a U.S. phenomenon either. Bianchi's study found that after Italy raised its retirement age to 67 in 2011, things got worse for younger workers. Suddenly, all the rewards were going to senior workers. Everyone else struggled just to get by. From 1985 to 2019, the mean worker age in Italy increased by 19%. Over the same period, anyone over 55 also started making bank. 56-year-olds saw a 33% increase in wages, while 65-year-olds saw a 53% increase in wages. But those under 35, their wages only went up by 14%. The difference in mean wages between older and younger workers almost doubled, increasing by 96%. No wonder millennials are ending up completely burned out and much sadder than their boomer coworkers. Multiple studies have found that they are the most burned out generation of all. One study found that 66% of millennials report moderate to high burnout compared to 39% of baby boomers. It gets worse. Another survey of 1,000 U.S. employees found that 77% of millennials have experienced burnout symptoms compared to only 38% of boomers. That wage gap, coupled with no room for growth, is really doing a number on their mental state, which obviously is another survey question, which found that only 47% of millennials rated their personal well-being as above average. 84% of boomers did the same. We would all be thrilled if our house values had quintupled, while we also got the highest raises by far right before retiring. Scientists aren't just guessing that finances are the main cause of millennial burnout and stress either. The APA's 2023 Stress in America survey found that millennials are drowning in financial stress. 67% of 18 to 34-year-olds and 63% of 35 to 44-year-olds feel completely consumed by money worries. Boomers, well, just 13%. Money is crushing millennials, and while they've gotten some pretty weak raises, it doesn't translate to a better quality of life. Oxfam found out that workers aged 25 to 34 are earning about $4,200 less than they would have 30 years ago. It's partly a result of increasing inequality across the board in wealthy countries, something that has been happening for a while now, and general corporate stagnation. Millennials are better educated than previous generations while being underpaid, overstressed, and in way more debt. And they need way more money just to get by, since their share of the nation's wealth is vastly lower than the boomers at the same age. Progress? Forget it. But the Federal Reserve has another theory on why millennials are spending less. They have less money. Millennials are not even getting the perks that were almost guaranteed just a few years ago. From 2000 to 2021, the number of college grads who got employee-provided healthcare as a perk dropped by 22%. It created a much more insecure generation, one that hesitates to pursue major life goals like starting a family. Millennials are also part of the sandwich generation. That means that many are caring for both young kids and aging parents, and that adds even more stress. Part of this reason they are a sandwich generation is because they're waiting until they're older to have kids, to be able to afford to have kids. This is thanks to the very high cost of living in most of the West. It takes people longer to become financially stable these days, and by longer we mean potentially their entire lives. Between 1980 and 2023, the median age for marriage for women has increased by 29%, from 22 to 28.4. The median age for the first birth for women went up by 23%, from 22.6 to 27.9. Only 13% of millennials opted for early marriage and parenthood. 27% of baby boomers did the same. While this isn't necessarily a bad thing for some millennials, waiting for marriage and kids isn't a choice, but a financial necessity. Let's say you're a millennial woman, 32 years old, looking to have a child. You know that you'll have to go back to work pretty soon after giving birth, as your office doesn't offer much maternity leave, and it's not like you can easily hop into another job in this economy. So you try to figure out the cost of childcare and you start calling daycare centers in your area. You come up with an average based on all the quotes you've heard, $2,500 a month. The cost of childcare has increased 220% since 1990, and it's not even completely reliable. The 2023 Kids Count report found that more than half of working parents have had to get to work late or leave early in the last 3 months because of issues with childcare. Even worse, 23% of those parents report being fired for those issues. You look back over the budget sheets realizing not only can you not afford childcare, you might end up losing your job because of it. That's not even taking into account all of the new clothes, cribs, bottles, and diapers you'll have to purchase. Baby Center found that the first year of baby-related costs comes out to around $20,400 for parents. That doesn't include giving birth or daycare for the most part. The costs of raising a baby can eat up to 22% of household income. Care.com found that the average parent can give up to 29% of their savings for childcare costs. To put that into perspective, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommends families should be spending no more than 7% of their household income on childcare. Because of those extreme costs, half of moms have changed their family plans. A quarter of potential moms have decided to have fewer children. Extreme costs have influenced every aspect of millennial thinking, even one as personal as giving birth. But while a big chunk of the millennials are struggling to get by, another segment is doing better than ever. And that's because inequality has rapidly increased over the years, with the Gini index rising by 25% between 1968 and 2022. That has created a huge gap in welfare within the millennial generation. For example, low-skilled service workers in the baby boomer generation could still look forward to a decent life. 63% of them owned their own homes at the age of 35. In that same group among millennials, only 42% owned their homes. The poorest millennials, around 14% in total, actually have negative net worth compared to only 8.7% of boomers. This huge inequality gap creates fractured communities and resentment, which often translates to crime and violence. Coupled with stricter policing, this has led to a massive increase in incarceration rates among millennials compared to previous generations at the same age, even though the crime rate in the US has gone down. What does it all mean? Millennials have lost their faith. In 2014, the Pew Research Center found that only 50% of millennials said they definitely believed in God. 64% of Gen X and 70% of baby boomers said the same. In fact, 35% of millennials aren't affiliated with any organized religion at all. The scandals that came to light in the Catholic Church probably didn't help in that regard. All of this has set some millennials back and fueled depression for others, but many, being fiercely independent, are just forging their own paths. Psychologists call it milestone agnosticism. Many millennials don't believe that there's a certain age by which they should have gotten married, started a business, or finished education. People are getting married in their 40s, they're going back to school in their 30s, or completely changing career paths at multiple points throughout their lives. And this doesn't scare them as much as it might scare other generations. That might be because millennials came of age during terrorist attacks, international recessions, and one of the worst job markets in recent history, so there is nothing this world could throw at them that they haven't seen some form of. But it also could be because, according to the same Solston data, millennials also scored the highest of any generation on the trait labeled as actions. Solston uses that to assess a person's openness to new experiences, which will serve millennials well when they have to deal with the future novel reality of never being able to retire. The silver lining is that, according to a 2015 study by American University, speaking about mental health issues has been normalized in the millennial generation. Since they grew up hearing about anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, they're much more willing to talk about their problems to their friends or with a therapist. And let's face it, that's something they'll need. Harvard MBAs are struggling to find jobs. Right now, 1 in 5 of them is unemployed. And the reason why should scare anyone with a career. It's not about intelligence, it's not about working hard, and it's definitely not about the degree. Something much bigger is quietly reshaping the job market, and it could affect you too. I'm Josh, and on today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're showing how the system is so broken by corporate greed. Even Harvard graduates can't get a job. Every year, Ivy League business school graduates flood the job market, landing what should be top-paying positions. 20-something MBAs start at a median base salary of $175,000, almost twice what an average household earns. But those golden prospects are disappearing fast. At Harvard Business School, 23% of the class of 2024 were still job hunting 3 months after graduation. That is up from only 10% in 2022. And it's not just Harvard. At Chicago and Northwestern, unemployment among graduates has tripled. The system they trained to run has failed them. Across corporate America, employers are recruiting fewer of these so-called future business leaders. Boards and investors are pushing these cuts to boost profits, but when they talk about costs, they often mean people's livelihoods. To the public and to employees, they offer a number of reasons: the economy, efficiency, market changes, plenty of excuses. But the truth is far simpler and far more concerning. It's not just management that's feeling the pinch. By late 2024, hiring in the information industry had dropped 30% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Finance was down 28%, while software development, data science, and marketing posted 20% fewer job openings. Across America, jobs are disappearing. Unemployment has climbed to 4.4%, the highest it's been since 2021. Now, a new tool threatens to destroy even more jobs. Artificial intelligence is transforming work. Anthropic says its software is capable of automating or assisting with 75% of computer programming tasks and 65% of marketing tasks. On top of that, it's taking over management and administrative jobs. These are 2 of the biggest sources of work in America. That is 1 in 5 jobs being threatened by software. If you listen to the people drumming up hype for AI, things are only gonna get worse. But the hype doesn't match reality. Researchers at Yale found no job disruption from AI in the first 3 years of ChatGPT. Even Anthropic found that its technology isn't affecting employment. Technology takes decades to change a workforce, not years or even months. So what is really going on? People already in AI-vulnerable roles aren't losing more jobs, hours, or wages than anyone else. But things are different for new graduates. For workers in their early 20s, job opportunities in AI-vulnerable occupations have fallen by 14% since ChatGPT arrived in 2022. People aren't being laid off, but finding a new job has never been harder. AI is changing the job market, and at the same time, it isn't. If that sounds confusing, you're not alone. The answer lies in the sectors where AI is applied. Management, administration, and the arts were already changing before this technology arrived. AI has become a convenient excuse for layoffs. It's easier to blame job losses on software than it is to admit that these decisions were made by managers chasing bigger profits. Talking up the importance of AI also sends a signal to investors. A handful of AI-oriented tech companies have driven 75% of growth in the returns on S&P 500 stocks over the past few years. By tying themselves to the AI trend, companies send a signal that they're worth investing in, even if AI isn't really changing their workforce. As a result, tech companies are praised for creating jobs, when really they're destroying them. Cutting staff is a quick route to short-term savings. Meta plans to lay off 20% of its workers, even as it's spending $600 billion in data centers. Job posts on Indeed for software development have fallen by 30% since the pandemic. The appeal of tech careers has added to the problem. The number of students graduating in computer and information science doubled between 2012 and 2021. That's enough graduates in a year to pack out Ohio Stadium. That means more graduates competing for fewer jobs, alongside experienced competitors. CEOs have led us to believe that jobs in computing and management could keep growing forever. Infinite growth is impossible, and that reality is now catching up. Yet, schools and training programs haven't adjusted the skills they're teaching. This has changed how people view education. 63% of registered voters believe that a college degree isn't worth the cost, up from 40% only 13 years ago. At first glance, this doesn't add up. Someone with a bachelor's degree earns $300 more per week than average. Someone with a professional degree or a doctorate earns $1,000 more. Not only do graduates earn $1.2 million more over their career, they're also less likely to be unemployed. But rising costs mean that many graduates no longer feel the benefit. Extra money is useless if you spend it all paying off your loans. The impact of cost-cutting by business leaders is being felt across the economy. Employment has been falling since the start of the 21st century. Almost 65% of men and 55% of women are now employed. The only times things have been worse were the Great Financial Crash and the COVID pandemic. This employment gap comes from a simple but harsh combination: more firing and less hiring, as business leaders push to keep wage bills down. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, businesses made 1.5 million fewer hires in 2025. Meanwhile, layoffs and discharges rose by 1.2 million. To put that into perspective, it's like the entire population of Montana was unexpectedly laid off. And the problem is getting bigger. With fewer companies hiring, unemployment has become a trap. The number of people out of work for more than 6 months has risen by over 50%. The average manager takes 6 months to find a new job, a month longer than 3 years ago. The number of jobs advertised per unemployed worker has halved since early 2022. There are fewer opportunities to go around. Healthcare has long been a growth sector. An aging population, better diagnosis of disease, and new technologies have increased both demand and supply. More nursing staff are needed than ever before. It seemed like an industry that would keep growing, creating 57,000 jobs per month in 2024. That all changed in 2025. Average monthly recruitment fell to 33,000. That is 18 entire hospitals worth of staff not being recruited every month. Profits keep rising, people keep waiting. Even the jobs most fundamental to the economy are not secure. As of March 2026, factories cut staff for 14 out of the previous 15 months. Warehousing, industrial goods, and food all made major layoffs in late 2025. Fewer people are making the things that businesses sell and customers need. Small and medium enterprises can't protect us from the damage big businesses are doing. Economic worries are stopping them from taking on new staff. Only 56% of small businesses tried to hire anyone in October of 2025. When small businesses don't grow, the economy becomes dominated by a handful of giant companies. When the leaders of those companies cut costs to protect their bonuses and dividends, it is the workers who pay the price. None of this is new, so why is it hitting so hard now? When company leaders take massive payouts for themselves, it throws the economy off balance. Between 1965 and 2018, the income gap between the richest and the poorest households rose by 40%. The wealthiest 1% hold 30% of the nation's wealth. Having made the economy tougher for everyone, business leaders have become more cautious in hiring. A 2024 survey showed that 70% planned on using more internships and similar programs to find staff. This makes the route to employment tougher and slower. It is harder to get hired, but just as easy to get fired. Investors and executives have made sure that workers have fewer legal and political protections than in other rich countries. All of this makes American workers more vulnerable in an unstable economy. When costs rise, one of the first options they turn to is recruiting fewer people. And sooner or later, they have to move on from less hiring to more firing. In February 2026, economists predicted that 60,000 new jobs would be created. Instead, 92,000 were lost. Looking to prove themselves right, the same commentators blamed bad weather and a nursing strike for the unexpected change. But if short-term events can cause such big disruption, then there are bigger problems underneath. If you were working in America right now, you'd face a huge gap between expectations and reality. Workforce confidence is low, especially for millennials and Gen Z. If you're on the lowest rungs of the career ladder, you're more likely to be kicked off when things get tough. The near future looks even worse. The economy is showing signs of stagflation. Prices keep rising, but wages stay flat and jobs are falling. And that is a problem. The usual tools to fight unemployment make inflation worse, while the tools to fight inflation reduce employment. Some economists outside the mainstream argue that the system needs a radical overhaul. We've lived with the promise of infinite growth for so long that neither politicians nor voters are ready to face the alternatives. No government is willing to try untested approaches from the economic left. The American job market is broken. Wage growth has fallen by a third since the early 2020s, and unemployment is growing. Corporate greed and pressure from investors has killed the jobs, while inequality has fueled a fragile economy in which people and businesses are vulnerable to any change. If you're feeling nervous about your prospects, then you're right to. This next crisis could be the one that kills your job.
Sarah graduated top of her class with a finance degree. She applied to 247 entry-level jobs and got 0 callbacks. Her roommate, a paralegal, was laid off, replaced by an AI that works for pennies. And she's not the only one. Hey, Josh here, and today on the Infographic Show, we're explaining how AI is causing a white-collar purge. In May 2025, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei warned that AI could wipe out nearly half of entry-level white-collar jobs and push unemployment to 10 to 20% within 5 years. It's a terrifying thought, especially when it's coming from the guy that is building the technology. That's not some far-off science fiction, it's reality. Amodei went so far as to claim the government should stop sugarcoating what's coming, namely the possible mass elimination of jobs across technology, finance, law, consulting, and other white-collar professions, especially entry-level gigs. And the question is, will anyone stop it? Ford CEO Jim Farley predicted AI would halve the number of white-collar jobs. When the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies start throwing around phrases like bloodbath and tsunami, you know something's up. And the numbers, well, they back it up. This whole thing is still playing out, but early returns are eye-opening to say the least. In the first 6 months of 2025, almost 78,000 tech job losses were directly attributed to AI. That's over 400 highly qualified people losing their job every single day. In January 2025, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported the lowest rate of job openings in professional services since 2013, a 20% year-over-year drop. The bleeding isn't theoretical. Based on an analysis of 180 million job postings, computer graphic artists fell 33% in 2025 after dropping 12% in 2024. Corporate compliance specialists dropped 29% in 2025. These are college-educated professionals with specialized skills whose prospects are melting away, not factory workers being replaced by robots. Remember when your parents told you to get a college degree for job security? We should probably talk about that. McKinsey, a leading consulting firm, estimated that generative AI could automate activities that currently represent between 60 to 70% of the working time in certain office occupations. Need a translation? Most of what entry-level workers can do can now be done by software, apparently. Customer service naturally was the canary in the coal mine. AI-powered chatbots already handle more than 85% of first-level support requests in large tech companies, up from 30% in 2020. Experts are predicting that number will rise to 90% by 2029, a staggering number. In just 5 years, the human touch is nearly gone. And it's not stopping there. Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff confirmed his company cut another 4,000 customer service positions following the rapid integration of AI agents handling roughly 50% of customer interactions. Imagine walking into your first office job and discovering half of your coworkers are software. Law firms might have thought that they were safe behind their degrees and expensive suits. Well, they're not. Tools like Casetext conduct legal research and draft contracts in mere minutes, a task that previously took a junior lawyer hours. Things are getting dire. Paralegals are now facing an 80% risk of automation by the end of 2026. Remember how lawyers used to bill $300 an hour for a first-year associate to review documents? AI will do 100,000 times more output for $3. Guess who's winning that margin call? And the scale of change is staggering. The World Economic Forum projected that by 2027, approximately 83 million jobs could be lost globally due to AI and automation. A Goldman Sachs report is estimating that 300 million full-time jobs worldwide could see their jobs affected in some way by generative AI. In the US specifically, up to 46% of tasks performed by entry-level employees could be automated in the next decade. That translates to roughly 10 to 12 million entry-level office jobs possibly vanishing overnight. You want to know what's really happening? Just listen to what companies are actually doing, not what they're saying in their press releases. A few years ago, IBM's CEO was stating that the company planned to halt hiring in almost 8,000 roles that could be replaced by AI. Human resources and administrative support were in the crosshairs, representing about 26,000 employees. In 2023, Accenture announced the cut of 19,000 jobs, mainly among non-billable and entry-level staff, while increasing its investment in training and deploying generative AI. Amazon is the latest to enter the entry-level apocalypse. They announced 16,000 corporate job cuts, half of the 30,000 estimated since October, all in the name of AI and efficiency. For a company with 1.5 million employees, that might sound small until you realize it is 10% of the corporate hierarchy. Notice the pattern: fire the humans, invest in the robots. It's not even subtle anymore. JP Morgan's managers have been told to avoid hiring people as the firm deploys AI across its business. That is one of the world's largest banks essentially just saying, "We're good on humans, thanks." And things can get even more dystopian. If you're a college undergraduate, now might be a good time to plug your ears. Internships, yes, the sacred American institution of getting coffee and making PowerPoints for college credit, is dying. Listings have fallen by more than 15% from January 2023 to January 2025. At the same time, applications have dramatically increased. The decline is even more severe in high-paying fields. Technology postings dropped by 30%, and professional services postings dropped by 42%. According to career site Handshake's 2025 Internship Index, the average applications per internship jumped to 109 for 2024 to 25, up from 62 the year before and 43 in 2022 to 23. That means internships are seeing around 2.5 times as many applicants as they did just 2 years ago. Internships in the tech sector were the most competitive, with 273 applications per posting. That was followed by financial services at 192 and professional services at 187. Internships are now a battlefield. The desperation has gotten so intense that AI and tough entry-level job markets are making it common for students to begin applying for internships as freshmen or sophomores. Why hire interns when AI can do the work? Companies are finding that young workers, once essential for tasks like transcription, data labeling, or content moderation, are no longer indispensable. And for those lucky few who actually land jobs, things are not looking good. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, real wage growth in entry-level professional jobs fell by 1.8% in 2024. That's in contrast to a 2.4% increase across the overall economy. So while everyone else is getting raises, entry-level workers are getting pay cuts. Because when there are 273 applicants for every tech internship, why pay more? Welcome to the new reality. And the math in general is just brutal. A 2024 MIT study found that the adoption of AI led to a 19% in job postings involving repetitive cognitive tasks. But for every new job created by AI, 2 or 3 junior jobs disappear or are never posted. So AI creates one $150,000 machine learning engineer position while eliminating 3 $50,000 entry-level analyst jobs. Sure, the total payroll might be similar, but tell that to the 2 people who never got hired in the first place. Every time someone predicts a job apocalypse, skeptics trot out the same argument. They said this about the printing press, the steam engine, the computer. And time again, technologies that were supposed to wipe out whole categories of work ended up doing something quieter and stranger. They actually changed how people work without erasing the work itself. Jobs adapted and roles shifted. New tasks appeared alongside old ones. Entire professions reorganized themselves around the new tools rather than being crushed by them. What survived was the work that required context, nuance, accountability, interpretation, and trust, the parts that machines are the worst at owning. But what if this time is different? Whereas previous waves of automation such as spreadsheets supported human work, generative AI can perform entire tasks and workflows from start to finish without or with minimal human intervention. Spreadsheets didn't do your accounting for you, they merely helped you do the accounting faster. AI actually does the accounting, that's the leap. Anthropic's research shows AI is currently being used mainly to help people do their jobs, a process known as augmentation. This will increasingly shift toward AI actually doing the jobs themselves, automation, in as little as a couple of years. Thinking that we can talk our boss out of integrating a bunch of glorified chatbots, well, that trick might soon be over. AI agents, or software programs that act autonomously to understand, plan, and execute tasks, are getting smarter by the day. They interface with existing tools and system networks as needed to fulfill user goals. These things don't need bathroom or coffee breaks, health insurance, or performance reviews. They just work. But what happens when an entire generation can't get entry-level jobs anymore? They're about to become another casualty in an economic disaster that's unfolding in real time. AI could destroy the very architecture of professional careers. Entry-level positions matter. They teach skills, enable upward mobility, and keep the pipeline of talent flowing to mid- and senior-level roles. Remove them, and the future workforce collapses. Companies need senior employees with experience, judgment, and institutional knowledge, but those people don't just materialize out of thin air. They start as a nervous 22-year-old, making mistakes on small projects, learning the ropes by doing and building key skills over the years. If you eliminate all the junior positions, where do you find the future senior employees? It's like removing the minor leagues and wondering why you're not producing the same caliber of major league players in 10 years. The immediate economic consequences are spreading fast, and you need to brace yourself for the fallout. Look no further than the student loan repayment predicament. As of December 2025, 1 in 3 borrowers are making payments more than 90 days late. 1 in 5 have stopped paying altogether. A projection from the Congressional Budget Office warned that if the current trend continues, student loan delinquency could rise even more. We are already on the precipice of what many are calling the default cliff, young people struggling to keep up and staring off into the abyss. Students are told education is an investment in their future. Now that investment is actively shrinking their job prospects, as entry-level finance roles are automated faster than they can even apply. The unemployment rates for people aged 22 to 27 with at least a bachelor's degree is consistently higher than the national rate. We've created a system where the more educated you are, the harder it is to find work. College is becoming a luxury purchase that decreases your employment prospects. That's not how it was supposed to work. And the ripple effects compound. Unemployed graduates don't buy houses. They don't start families. They don't consume at the levels economists projected when they took out their student loans. They move back in with their parents, delay major life decisions, and watch their savings evaporate, all while AI does the jobs they trained for. There are a few subset career paths that may well survive this AI white-collar purge. While software engineers have every reason to panic, plumbers and electricians are chillin'. The data backs this up. Parents overwhelmingly point to trades as safer than digital roles. These roles are seen as AI resilient compared to their tech field peers. And if you're entering the tech field, make sure you're the one learning to build the data centers, not just run them. Just ask NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, who recently told the World Economic Forum that he foresaw a lot of six-figure jobs being unlocked as part of the unending AI data center build-out across the globe. It's part of what he calls the greatest infrastructure project humanity has ever undertaken. Meanwhile, the United States is short of hundreds of thousands of factory workers, construction workers, and auto technicians who remain in sharp demand. It turns out real job security was the manual labor we looked down on along the way. The electrician who fixes the server farm has better prospects than the paralegal who got replaced by the server farm. So what's actually happening? Alarmists see a white-collar apocalypse, skeptics point to false alarms, but realists know that most experts expect shrinking growth or outright losses by 2030. Still, unemployment has not spiked.
The data is consistent with either a normal technological transition or the early stages of something far more disruptive. Which path will we be on in 5 years? Whether this becomes a catastrophe or just another economic transition depends on choices being made now about how we deploy this technology, how we distribute the gains, and what we do about the people we leave behind. And Sarah is still out there, 247 applications deep, watching AI chatbots send her automated rejection emails after one scan of her resume for jobs that AI will eventually do entirely anyway. Her friend who went to trade school, well, she's got 3 job offers and is currently negotiating with the one that pays the most. Guess who's winning in this new economy? America is drowning in debt, $39 trillion of it. If you spent $1 million every single day since the birth of Christ, you still wouldn't reach $1 trillion. That's not even 2% of what America owes. It works out roughly to $114,000 for every single American. You've been told it's backed by the full faith and credit of the government. You've been told to trust the process. You've been lied to. It's held together by a system you've never seen, never voted for, and probably never even thought about. It's a global system that forces the entire world to keep using the dollar just to survive. Now it's starting to crack. Countries controlling nearly half of the world's daily oil supply are tearing that system apart. When it breaks, it won't happen to them. It happens to you. Chapter 1. The $39 trillion illusion. The US dollar appears in nearly 90% of all foreign exchange transactions on the Earth. 9 out of 10 times a currency changes hands on this planet, one of those currencies is the dollar. When you figure that the Earth currently has 180 national currencies, it's clear that the dollar is the operating system that the rest run on. What built this behemoth? Trade data and decades of financial flows point to one central mechanism, the global oil market, which also is ironically denominated in dollars. The global oil market is worth approximately $2.5 trillion per year. In physical terms, that is larger than the market value of the globe's gold, iron, copper, aluminum, nickel, zinc, lead, tin, cobalt, and lithium markets combined. Oil is the single largest traded good in human history, and for 50 years, the vast majority of it has been purchased in American dollars. A Japanese company buying Saudi oil has to convert yen to dollars first. French refineries importing Kuwaiti crude must buy dollars first. Indian power plants importing Iraqi oil have to buy dollars first. It all creates an insatiable demand for US currency. That demand is what absorbs American inflation. It's also what lets the Federal Reserve print money without immediately destroying the purchasing power of every American paycheck. The only reason your groceries aren't more expensive than they already are is because the central banks of Tokyo, Frankfurt, New Delhi, and Seoul are soaking up trillions of American dollars each year just to keep their lights on. And now it is quietly coming apart. Unlike most of the rest of the world, the United States exports more oil than it imports, mostly from either Mexico or Canada. It's a convenient, closed North American circuit. What you may not know is that the United States is currently the single largest oil producer on the Earth, producing more than it consumes. So while the US doesn't need to buy oil in dollars, it needs the rest of the world to buy oil in dollars. In fact, it depends on it. It's a completely different problem, and one the United States is currently losing. Chapter 2. The 1974 Secret Handshake. In 1944, the United States gathered 44 countries in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and they made them an offer. America had all these factories, most of the gold, and a global military posture that could politely discourage disagreement. The deal was simple. Everyone would peg their currency to the dollar. The dollar would be pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. In other words, a dollar represented more than just a piece of paper. It could be a claim on something real gold. And for about 20 years, it worked beautifully. Then the cracks started to show. America made some expensive investments. Vietnam, the Great Society, the space race, a defense budget that would make a Las Vegas whale blush. By the late 1960s, the US was running deficits and printing dollars faster than it had gold to back them. That's when the Europeans, the French in particular, started doing the math. They started looking at how many dollars were actually circulating, and then they looked at America's gold reserves, and they decided those numbers were not adding up. So they started cashing out. Literally. They loaded dollars into hundreds of planes and ships, and they came back with gold. Over 3 years, France repatriated over 3,000 tons of gold to its vaults. Other countries followed. America's gold reserves, once 80% of the world's supply, started draining fast. By 1971, the jig was up.
So Richard Nixon went on television and closed the gold window. He announced that effective immediately, US dollars were no longer convertible to gold. He canceled Bretton Woods with no warning and no vote. The Americans called it the Nixon shock. The French called it several things that don't translate politely. Suddenly, the global financial system, previously tied to gold, was now built on, well, a vague sense of trust that America would behave responsibly. Given the preceding decade, it was quite a lot to ask. Over the next few years, things got weird. Currencies floated against each other with no anchor, which led to a massive spike in inflation. The system was held together by good vibes and crossed fingers. Then, in October 1973, the Arab members of OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, declared an oil embargo against the United States. Prices quadrupled, gas stations ran dry, Americans lined up around city blocks hoping to fill their tanks. The economy, already limping, took a chair to the knees, which is when Henry Kissinger stepped in. Kissinger, depending on your perspective, was either a master strategist or a war criminal with excellent table manners. What he undeniably was effective, something that was in short supply in 1974. The dollar had just lost its gold backing. The economy was wobbling. The US needed a new reason for the world to want its currency, and fast. Kissinger's solution was almost absurd in its simplicity. If you can't back the dollar with gold, back it with oil, something every single country needs every single day. With this idea floating around in his head, he went to Saudi Arabia under the pretense of helping modernize infrastructure. But behind closed doors, the real deal took shape. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil exclusively in US dollars, which meant that every country on the earth that needed oil would first need dollars to buy it with. And just like that, a country that had quietly walked away from gold had created a new rule. If you want energy, you need dollars. In exchange, the US guaranteed Saudi Arabia's security. The Saudis essentially got the most powerful bodyguard in history. America got its monetary mojo back. Both parties went home happy. Within a year, every major oil producer followed suit. No grand vote, no global summit. Saudi Arabia moved, and it made sense, and everyone else fell in line. And the wildest part? Well, some parts of this arrangement stayed classified for over 40 years. The deal that quietly determined the cost of energy, housing, and groceries for half a century wasn't publicly confirmed until 2016, which tells you something. But by then, the system had already been working almost perfectly without interruption for half of a century. Until now. Chapter 3. Enter the Dragon. What Kissinger built did something remarkable. It took America's greatest vulnerability, a currency that was no longer backed by anything physical, and it turned it into its greatest strategic weapon. Once oil was priced in dollars, countries no longer used up their dollar reserves. They held on to them. And when they held on to them, they invested them mostly into US Treasury bonds, which meant that every time a foreign government bought American debt, they were effectively financing Washington's federal government. The US built highways, funded wars, expanded its military, and won the Cold War, all while the rest of the world helped foot the bill. It was like installing a toll booth on the global economy and then making every country pass through it just to turn on their lights. For 50 years, the toll booth held. Then China decided to build a road around it. China currently imports nearly 2 million barrels of oil per day from Saudi Arabia alone. That's enough to fill approximately 127 Olympic-sized swimming pools with crude oil every 24 hours. China is now Saudi Arabia's single largest customer. For years, it's paid for all of that oil in dollars. For each barrel purchased, an invisible fee flowed back into the US system, all because of that deal in the 70s. But it was a different development, quieter and more technical, that revealed China's true game plan. In 2021, a project launched out of Basel, Switzerland's Bank for International Settlements. It was called mBridge, the Multiple Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC, bridge. That name is forgettable. The idea is not. mBridge is a system that lets countries move money directly between each other using digital currencies issued by their own central banks. It avoids intermediaries, detours, and most critically, any US oversight. To understand why that matters, you have to understand how things work today. Right now, if Thailand wants to send money to China, it must bounce it through a chain of banks, most of them Western, and then ultimately settle the transaction in dollars using SWIFT. SWIFT is the messaging system that banks use to talk to each other. It processes about $5 trillion a day, and because it operates under Western oversight, the US has enormous influence over it, which means it can be weaponized, and it has been. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the G7 kicked Russian banks out of SWIFT and froze approximately $300 billion in Russian Western reserves. If you're another country watching that happen, like China, India, or Saudi Arabia, you start to ask uncomfortable questions. What happens if we're next? China didn't write a strongly worded letter in response, it simply just built its own exit. And that's the gist of mBridge, a payment system that routes around SWIFT entirely. It went live in 2024. By late 2025, mBridge had processed over 4,000 transactions worth $55 billion, a massive increase from its early tests. But it is still tiny compared to SWIFT. mBridge wasn't designed to force its users to ask the West's permission to make transactions. It was designed to avoid that, which makes it something entirely new. It's not a replacement for the toll booth, but it is certainly a way around it. America's financial nuclear weapon, its ability to cut off any country from the global economy, doesn't look so unavoidable anymore. And this is where things get scary. Chapter 4. The Slow Bleed. In June 2024, news exploded across the internet claiming that Saudi Arabia had allowed its petrodollar agreement to expire. The deal was dead. It was time for the dollar to pack its bags. The Saudis were ready to receive payments from a grab bag of currencies, including the euro, the rupee, and even the Chinese yuan. It's a bit of a stretch to say that there was ever a binding legal contract at all. The 1974 bilateral economic agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia had technically expired in 2001, and it was never the legal foundation of anything. The petrodollar system was never a treaty but a structural agreement, a self-reinforcing habit of mutual dependency. It didn't need to be renewed. It was simply baked into the architecture of global trade itself. That system, though, is undeniably unraveling, one yuan-denominated oil transaction at a time. Economist Zoltan Polshar called this transition Bretton Woods 3. His argument, first made in March 2022, is that the world is shifting from what he calls inside money, paper claims on governments like US Treasury bonds, to outside money, physical stuff like gold and commodities. His punchline was commodities are collateral and collateral is money. When the G7 froze Russia's reserves, it didn't merely punish Russia, it told every non-Western central bank on Earth that dollar-denominated assets could be confiscated, and that changed the calculus permanently. In practice, de-dollarization, as it's been called, looks more like a slow bleed than an outright crash. The dollar share of global foreign exchange reserves has dropped from around 85% in the 1970s to roughly 58% today. Sure, it took 50 years to get to a number that's still nothing to balk at, but that number, it is the lowest point in 2 decades. And here is where all of this might land in your life. The US government currently pays over $1 trillion a year in interest on its debt. That is more than the annual spend of the entire defense and education budgets combined. The number is kept from being even more catastrophic because foreign governments are constantly buying US Treasury bonds. It keeps the bond prices up and yields, and therefore interest rates, down. Mortgage rates track Treasury yields almost exactly. When rates moved from 2.65% to 7.79% between 2021 and 2023, the monthly payment on a $400,000 loan jumped by almost $1,300, putting car payments and family vacations in jeopardy. Now imagine that instead of the Fed raising rates deliberately, the driver is simply fewer countries needing to buy dollars for oil. With fewer dollars needed, that's fewer treasuries purchased. Bond prices quickly fall and yields rise as mortgage rates follow. The Fed can cut the federal funds rate all at once, but it can't force central banks to keep absorbing American debt. And if they stop, that bill lands on you. Chapter 5. The Final Domino. Every global reserve currency in history has eventually lost that status. Every single one. The Roman denarius, the Dutch guilder, the British pound sterling, each one was, in its era, the operating system of global commerce, and each one fell when the underlying economic logic that made everyone want that currency slowly stopped being true. Reserve currencies have the same problem as bad software. Everyone knows a better option exists, but switching is a pain, so you keep on running the old version until you absolutely can't anymore. When Britain finally lost reserve currency status, it didn't go quietly all at once in a big apocalyptic bang. It went through decades of inflation, emergency bailouts, and a standard of living that steadily declined relative to the rest of the developed world. The pound just slowly became less and less relevant. British citizens absorbed the cost in ways that never quite showed up on a single front page. That is the template for the dollar today. The US is not Britain in 1945. The dollar is vastly more embedded in global finance than sterling ever was. But the pattern is the same. Build global demand for your currency and then watch that demand erode. Britain did it through empire. America did it through oil. Now that system is being routed around. BRICS now represents almost 36% of global GDP and 44% of global oil production. The bloc includes most of the world's largest oil producers. Bridge works. CIPS, China's alternative to SWIFT, connects 109 countries. India is buying Russian oil in yuan and rupees. Brazil and China ditched the dollar in their bilateral trade. Saudi Arabia is conducting transactions on Bridge while simultaneously declining to formally join BRICS. It's exactly the kind of strategic ambiguity a country maintains when it's keeping its options open. None of these systems are the dollar. None of them replace SWIFT on their own, but the dollar didn't take over the world overnight either. It won because for decades the rules were simple. The world runs on oil and oil is priced in dollars. So if you wanted energy, you needed dollars. That's the part that's starting to crack. America's $39 trillion in debt only works because the rest of the world keeps needing dollars. The real question isn't whether China builds a perfect alternative. It's what happens when the world decides what it's built is good enough and starts moving those trillions somewhere else. Because if that shift actually begins, it doesn't stay contained to currency markets. It spills into interest rates, asset prices, and eventually real life. And at that point, the system doesn't slowly adjust.
What if everything you were told about living a long, happy life was a lie? Work hard, pay your taxes, take your pills, retire at 65, live into your 80s. But here's the shocking truth: most of us won't make it that far. Researchers discovered a hidden death cliff for Americans born after the 1950s. Late Gen X and millennials, it's even worse. So why is this happening? I'm Josh, and on today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're telling you why you will die younger than your parents. Chapter 1. The Trillion-Dollar Illusion. Let's be fair to American medicine for a moment, because it genuinely deserves some credit. Some facilities are nothing short of extraordinary. If you are a 72-year-old man who's just had a heart attack, the American hospital is genuinely one of the best places on earth to be. Cardiac intervention technology is peerless. Late-stage cancer survival rates are among the highest in the world. Once death is at your door, American medicine is a remarkable machine for fighting it off. The problem is that sentence, once death is at your door. Because the American healthcare system is not actually a health system, it is a disease management system. There's almost no investment in keeping you well, only in treating you after you're already sick. The difference isn't philosophical, it is financial and architectural. And for tens of millions of Americans, it is in fact deadly. Consider the numbers. In 2024, the United States spent approximately $14,800 per person per year on healthcare. That's about $5,000 more than what Switzerland, the next highest spender, pays. That is 18% of its GDP. The peer country average is nearly half of that figure. And yet, U.S. life expectancy sits at 79 years, a full 3.7 years below the average of comparable wealthy nations. Japan, Switzerland, Spain, they all hit 84. The U.S. trails them all. So where does all the money go? A significant chunk of it disappears into paperwork. The U.S. spends an estimated $925 per person per year on health administration, compared to $245 among peer nations. That is $680 per person every year vanishing into billing departments, insurance paperwork, and endless prior authorization phone calls. A vast bureaucratic machine that exists only to decide who pays for care that's already been delivered. Not to improve it, not to expand it, just to argue about it and report it. Researchers estimate that more than a quarter of all U.S. healthcare spending, roughly $730 billion in a single year, goes toward treating preventable conditions. That's almost as much as the country spends on its entire military. $750 billion every year spent cleaning up a mess the system refuses to prevent. Fee-for-service medicine, where doctors and hospitals make money by treating illness, not preventing it, creates a system literally dependent on people getting sick. A healthy America is a less profitable America. That is just the math. Chapter 2. The Engineered Gauntlet. So, the system isn't built to keep you healthy. Fine. But what is actually making people sick? The answer is the environment that has been deliberately constructed around the American body. The shelf-stable junk food, the lack of commuter infrastructure, the economic merry-go-round, the despair, the gauntlet Americans walk through every single day, often without realizing it is quietly costing them years of their lives. Start with what Americans eat. According to the latest CDC data, Americans get approximately 55% of their total calories from ultra-processed foods. For kids, that number rises to nearly 70%. Ultra-processed foods aren't just a bit unhealthy, they are barely foods at all. They're something else entirely. Industrial formulations engineered in labs to maximize taste, shelf life, and profit margin, with little to no nutritional value. Colorings, emulsifiers, artificial flavors, preservatives, and sweeteners at concentrations that have no parallel in nature. 73% of the food on American grocery store shelves falls into this category. The US ranks first in the world for consuming it. And the health consequences of eating this stuff on the regular are not subtle. A 2024 review of nearly 10 million people found the more ultra-processed food you eat, the worse things get across the board. Your risk of dying from heart disease goes up by 50%. Risk of anxiety up 48%. Obesity risk up 55%. Type 2 diabetes up 40%. Depression up 20%. Push it further and there's a 66% increased risk of death from heart disease and a 21% higher risk of dying from any cause at all. In another major study, men eating the most processed food had a 29% higher risk of colorectal cancer. It's not just one bad outcome, it is really potentially all of them all at once. Connect those numbers to America's obesity crisis and the picture gets even sharper. Over 40% of US adults are now obese. Among millennials in their 30s, the numbers are rising steeply. This generation is becoming metabolically sick earlier than any other in modern American history, entering their 40s and 50s carrying burdens their grandparents didn't face until their 60s. Diseases once rare under 50 are now showing up decades earlier. A cluster of 6 obesity-related cancers, colorectal, endometrial, kidney, pancreatic, gallbladder, and others, are rising sharply in younger generations. For several of them, millennials now face roughly double the risk baby boomers had at the same age. In 2019, a controlled study matched 2 diets, processed and unprocessed, calorie for calorie, nutrient for nutrient, macro for macro. It should have produced equal outcomes, yet people assigned to the ultra-processed diet ate roughly 500 more calories per day and gained about 2 pounds more over just 2 weeks. The ultra-processed foods were simply harder to stop eating. Now factor in the infrastructure problem, which is less obvious but just as damaging. America was built around cars. After World War II, the country expanded into cul-de-sacs, strip malls, and parking lots the size of small towns. Driving became the default setting for everything, and in the process, ordinary movement disappeared from the background of daily life. Think about it. You wake up and walk maybe, 40 steps to your car or bus, sit for the commute, sit at your desk all day, drive home, sit again. The most aerobic thing in your day might be carrying your groceries from the trunk. Basically, ordinary movement was engineered out of daily American life, and nobody sent the memo. In European cities like Amsterdam, cycling remains the easiest method to commute to work. It's not a lifestyle choice, it's just what people do. In Paris, people walk to the metro without thinking twice. The environment does the work for you. In most of the United States, exercise is a separate task that you have to schedule, drive to, and then treat like a second job. If you're a working parent juggling 2 jobs in a city built for cars, good luck. But none of that is actually the darkest part of the gauntlet that Americans are running. The darkest part is what researchers call the deaths of despair. Increasingly, Gen Xers and older millennials are dying from something that sounds more like a social diagnosis than a medical one. Drug overdoses, self-harm, alcohol-related liver failure, traffic fatalities by impairment. This is what we mean when we say deaths of despair. They are the catastrophic output of a generation that has been economically squeezed, socially isolated, and left without adequate mental health support for decades. Millennial opioid overdose deaths increased more than 500% between 1999 and 2017. Fentanyl changed the arithmetic of the crisis entirely. At its peak, more Americans were dying of drug overdoses every year than died in the entire Vietnam War. More than car accidents, more than gun violence. And these deaths fell disproportionately on the exact generation researchers identified as having the worst generational mortality trajectory since modern record-keeping began. Scientists have a name for the people lost in that gap: the missing Americans. In 2023 alone, approximately 705,000 people died who likely wouldn't have if the US had the same mortality rates as other wealthy countries. Back in 2021, that number climbed to 1.1 million. Since 1980, the running total sits at approximately 14.7 million excess deaths. That is the entire population of Pennsylvania gone. Chapter 3. The Longevity Paywall. You might still be holding on to one comforting thought right now, that we're all in this together, that this is a national problem shared equally. Rich or poor, fentanyl doesn't check your income before it kills you. The food environment poisons everyone's kids. The healthcare system fails us all the same. That thought is almost the precise opposite of the truth. According to a landmark study built on 1.4 billion tax and social security records, the richest American men live 15 years longer than the poorest men. The richest American women live 10 years longer than the poorest women. Being poor in America is as deadly as smoking cigarettes your entire life. At least the cigarette companies had to put a warning label on the box. The gap is getting worse. Most people assume health is mostly about whether poor people can afford hospital care. And yes, that is part of it. But the deeper mechanism is more insidious. It's chronic stress as a biological weapon. Financial precarity, or the low-grade constant dread of being one paycheck, one emergency, or one car repair away from catastrophe, activates the same physiological pathways in the body as physical illness. It raises cortisol, sparks chronic inflammation, suppresses your immune system. In other words, poverty physically ages you at the cellular level, faster than biology alone ever would. And for tens of millions of Americans, that stress is the permanent background noise of their entire adult life. And then there is the ambulance problem. In 2018, a 45-year-old woman in Boston got her leg trapped between a subway train and the platform. It was a serious injury. She was clearly in agony, and as bystanders rushed to help her, she was caught on video begging, literally begging them not to call an ambulance. The woman's story went viral because it was extreme, but the underlying calculation she was making is not. A YouGov survey found that 23% of Americans say that during a medical emergency requiring immediate transportation, they deliberately did not call an ambulance because of the cost. Meanwhile, at the other end of the income spectrum, something almost comically different is happening. You may have heard of Brian Johnson. He's the tech entrepreneur who sold his payment company to PayPal for $800 million and proceeded to become a cultural lightning rod. He revealed he spends over $2 million per year on his Blueprint anti-aging protocol. Headlines claim he has the organs of an 18-year-old. Want to know how he did it? Johnson wakes up at 4:30 a.m., swallows over 100 supplements, eats an algorithmically optimized 2,000-calorie vegan diet that ends at 11 a.m., he exercises with a precision that would make a professional athlete uncomfortable, and is monitored continuously by a team of about 30 doctors tracking dozens of biomarkers across his entire body. He has tried gene therapy, he has tried plasma infusions, he has genuinely attempted to reverse his own biological clock. If you ever find yourself with a spare $2 million lying around and 30 doctors on retainer, you too can try to have the organs of an 18-year-old. For everyone else, there's a $40 copay and a 4-month wait to see someone who will spend 11 minutes with you. And if you think the rich at least have it good, well, here's the final gut punch. The wealthiest Americans have shorter lifespans on average than the wealthiest Europeans. In some cases, the richest Americans have survival rates on par with the poorest Europeans in countries like Germany, France, and the Netherlands. Even buying your way to the top tier doesn't get you where a middle-class Frenchman already is by default. The American healthcare system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was designed, as a reactive business built to intercept your death once it arrives and then bill you generously for the privilege once you return home. It was never designed to keep you well. The food environment you navigate every day was not designed with your health in mind. The city you live in was not designed to keep your heart in shape. And the economic pressure crushing tens of millions of Americans is not a character flaw, but a physiological sentence. And until those choices change, the data has a message for you. Yes, you, born after 1965, eating what the grocery store offers, living where the suburb was plotted, working what the economy allows, you are gonna feel this, not as a policy debate, but as the years you have left. Hey, it's Josh, and today on the Infographic Show, we're asking what would happen if everyone tried to pull their money out of the bank tomorrow. On a normal day, banks look boring. People swipe their cards, they pay their bills, get direct deposits, and maybe stop by a branch to grab a little cash. But behind the scenes, it's a lot different. Your bank is moving money digitally between accounts, approving loans, and investing deposits to earn a return. Here's the important part most people don't realize. Your money isn't just sitting in a vault. Banks only keep a small fraction of deposits as physical cash. The rest is loaned out for mortgages, car payments, business investments, and government bonds. That system works because on a regular day, only a tiny number of people want their money at once. So basically, at a bank, everything runs on trust. Trust that your paycheck clears. Trust that the ATM works. Trust that when you need your money, it'll be there. But all it takes is one headline, one rumor, or one unexpected shock to flip that trust upside down. And when that happens, the calm, the everyday routine, collides with something much more dangerous. Something that could lead to some people losing everything. A bank run doesn't start with chaos, it starts with something small going wrong behind the scenes. As long as customers believe their money is safe, daily life continues as normal. But when that confidence takes an even small hit, unease begins to spread. And that trigger could be almost anything. It could start with a sudden stock market crash and reports of mounting bank losses, or with rising interest rates that erode the value of long-term investments. A major business customer might pull out a massive deposit, or an earnings report could reveal a bank struggling to balance what it owes depositors against money tied up in loans and bonds. And that is when the clock starts ticking. Remember, banks don't keep most of your money as cash. They lend it out or invest it, so if the value of those assets falls, or too many deposits leave at once, the bank's cushion begins to shrink. On paper, the bank still holds its assets and maintains its balance sheet, but it has far less room for error. In some situations, the problem is simply speed. A modern bank can lose billions of dollars in a matter of hours, especially when large corporate clients move money digitally and without warning. If a bank can't sell investments quickly enough without taking major losses, its financial position weakens. Nothing has exploded yet, and there's still a chance that the bank could meet its obligations. ATMs still work, transfers still go through, but behind the scenes, regulators, executives, and investors are watching very closely. And what happens next will determine whether the bank survives or collapses entirely. And out in the real world, customers might begin to sense something's off. There's no full-blown panic yet, just discomfort. A feeling that the system isn't as solid as it looked yesterday. That unease is the spark. And what happens next causes that spark to turn into an inferno. This is the moment everything changes. Up until now, people just felt uneasy. But once a bank actually looks like it might be in trouble, fear takes over. Customers stop asking questions and start taking action. They log into apps, they visit branches, and they hit ATMs. Not because they need the cash, but because they don't want to be the last person left when the money runs out. Banks are built for normal days. Maybe they can handle slightly busy days, but they're not built for stampedes. Every institution carefully plans how much cash it needs for daily withdrawals. The treasury system works when behavior is predictable. But when more people than expected start pulling their money out, those reserves start to get strained fast. The further withdrawals go beyond what the bank planned for, the higher the risk becomes. And customers can sense that. A few missing features in an app, a slower wire transfer, a longer line at the branch. Each small delay feels like proof that something is wrong. And here is where things start to spiral. A bank run happens when large numbers of people withdraw their money from a financial institution in a short period of time. As withdrawals grow, the bank starts to look weaker to everyone who still has money there. And as the bank looks weaker, even more people rush to pull their funds. Fear feeds fear. One person's just in case becomes another person's emergency. The situation snowballs until the bank simply can't keep up. Too many people want cash at once, and the money just isn't liquid enough to move that fast. The money locked up in mortgages, business loans, and government bonds takes too long to convert to cash. So to meet demand, banks are forced to sell assets as quickly as possible. And selling fast means selling cheap. Loans get abruptly called in. Bonds are dumped at rock-bottom prices. Every rushed sale weakens the bank even more, making customers even more nervous. History shows how violent that feedback loop can become. During the Great Depression, the stock market crash made people doubt the financial system. Depositors rushed to pull out money, forcing banks to liquidate assets just to survive. News of one bank run triggered another and another and another. The panic spread faster than any regulation could contain. In 1930, one rumor alone helped sink the Bank of the United States. After a customer walked out angry and spread talk of insolvency, crowds formed within hours. By the end of the day, millions in cash were gone, not because the bank failed first, but because fear did the damage before the truth could catch up. But modern banking moves even faster. In 2023, Silicon Valley Bank saw about $42 billion leave in a single day as corporate customers transferred money digitally. No lines, no shouting, just a few simple clicks. The withdrawals overwhelmed the bank's ability to sell assets or raise capital fast enough to pay out its customers. And to customers, that feels terrifying. If you're told that you can't get your money, your first thought isn't relief, it's, what are they hiding? And that thought pours gasoline on the fire. At this stage, the run is no longer controlled. Every withdrawal makes the next one more urgent. Every headline brings more customers demanding their money. And the worst part, this is only the beginning. Once panic hits the banks, the damage doesn't stay inside the walls. It starts to spill out into the entire economy. That's when mitigation measures kick in. Emergency tactics designed to slow the run, restore confidence, and keep the institution from failing outright are launched. Some of these moves are subtle, others are dramatic, and all of them are about buying time. First, the banks try to slow everything down. In the past, banks literally slowed people in line. During U.S. recessions, employees and even their relatives would stand in front of tellers making tiny deposits and withdrawals just to clog up the system and delay the rush until closing time. Today, the same idea exists digitally. Transfers suddenly take longer, apps show technical issues, wires get delayed, limits are placed on how much you can move in a day. None of this fixes the problem, it just slows the bleeding long enough for the bank to react. And then they start scrambling for cash. If reserves aren't enough, the bank borrows from other banks and money markets or directly from the central bank. This is why the central banks are called the lender of last resort. Their job is to inject cash into the system when panic threatens to wipe out otherwise functional institutions. In 2023, the U.S. Federal Reserve created the Bank Term Funding Program, allowing banks to borrow against their assets to meet withdrawals, assuming those investments would eventually mature at full value. Programs like this are designed to quickly turn frozen assets into usable cash. If a bank can borrow a massive amount of cash fast enough, it may be able to stop a run before it becomes fatal. But borrowing also carries risk. It keeps the lights on today while pushing the problems into tomorrow. Then comes the reassurance. One of the strongest anti-panic tools is insurance on deposits. In the US, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, was created after the Great Depression to guarantee customer money up to a limit if a bank collapses. If people believe their deposits are protected, they're less likely to sprint for the exits. And if a bank actually fails, the insurer steps in. Sometimes another strong bank will buy the troubled one and customers barely even notice the switch. Other times, regulators seize the bank and sell off assets to pay depositors back. Deposit insurance doesn't create new money, but it does redistribute losses across the system. Banks may also try to lock money in place. Another tactic is encouraging term deposits. These are accounts that pay higher interest but can't be withdrawn until a set date. By locking up part of their liabilities, banks protect themselves from sudden cash demands. If enough money is tied into non-callable deposits, the bank can survive even while other customers withdraw. But here is the unfortunate truth. Mitigation doesn't always lead to a solution. Slowing transactions, borrowing cash, and guaranteeing deposits can stabilize a bank temporarily, but they can't undo the losses already locked into bad assets or panicked withdrawals. Eventually, the moment everyone fears arrives. At the start of a run, cash flows out fast, but after hours, sometimes even minutes, the vaults, ATMs, and digital settlement systems start to hit hard limits. People try to withdraw their money and suddenly the machines say no. There's simply no more liquid cash available to release. The hard truth is that even if the bank has assets it could sell, there's simply not enough time to convert them into cash and get it to customers' accounts. Panic drives the vast majority of people to demand their money at once, and the bank just can't keep up. But there's an even more terrifying scenario. The bank might have sold all its assets, many of them at a loss, and that means that there's literally no money left. In this case, the only way people will get their money back is if someone else, like the government or another financial institution, steps in. At this point, the bank isn't choosing to stop paying people, it is physically unable to meet the demand. The money is either trapped in future sales or loans, while customers need it to be in the present. Once liquidity is gone, the crisis stops being about fear and starts to be about math. There simply isn't enough cash to satisfy everyone asking for it all at once. And when a bank can't pay its customers, the problem quickly spreads. One institution's failure sends shocks through the entire system. When a bank finally runs out of options, the crisis stops being private and becomes public. If a bank can't meet withdrawals, it effectively fails. At that point, the Federal Reserve, regulators, and government institutions have no choice but to step in. Not to save a single bank, but to protect the entire system from collapsing with it. Historically, this is where the government takes control. During the Great Depression, after Franklin D. Roosevelt became president in 1933, he declared a nationwide bank holiday. Every bank in the country closed temporarily, so federal inspectors could check which ones were strong enough to reopen. Weak banks were reorganized, merged, or shut down completely. Roosevelt also understood that money runs on psychology as much as math, so he went straight to the public. In radio broadcasts, he told the Americans that keeping money in a bank was safer than hiding it under a mattress. He promised that reopened banks would safeguard deposits and that the government would not allow endless failures to continue. Those words mattered. They helped slow the bleeding by restoring confidence in institutions that people had completely lost faith in. But speeches weren't enough. When a modern bank collapses, the FDIC usually moves in behind the scenes. It may seize the bank after business hours, arrange a takeover by a stronger institution, and reopen the next business day under new ownership. To customers, it can look like nothing happened, even though the original bank technically died overnight. At the same time, the Federal Reserve injects liquidity into the system. It lends to healthy banks, stabilizes payment networks, and tries to make sure cash keeps moving so one failure doesn't trigger 10 more. But here is the reality. When the Fed steps in, it means the bank that held people's hard-earned cash has completely failed. After the panic, the freezes, and the government takeover, one question matters more than anything else to the regular people. Do I get my money back? When a bank run occurs and it leads to the bank failing, recovery doesn't mean everything magically returns to normal. It means sorting out who gets paid, how much they get, and who ends up taking the loss. In the United States, the most important safety net is deposit insurance, and through the FDIC, customer deposits are guaranteed up to $250,000 per depositor, per bank, per account category. That means if your bank collapses, the insured portion of your money is protected. In many cases, the process is fast. Regulators arrange for another bank to take over the failed one, and customers regain access to their insured funds almost immediately, or at least by the next business day. Checking accounts will reopen, debit cards work again, direct deposits resume, and so for millions of everyday customers, recovery feels almost instantaneous. Their money survives because it was insured. But not everyone is that lucky. Any amount above the insured limit is not guaranteed. If you had $300,000 in one account, only $250,000 is protected. The remaining $50,000 becomes a part of the failed bank's assets. You might get some of it back later after loans and property are sold, or you might get almost nothing. It depends on how bad the collapse really was. Large businesses, investors, and wealthy depositors feel the pain first. Payroll accounts, operating cash, and corporate reserves can be frozen or partially wiped out. And that's how a bank failure can ripple into layoffs, missed paychecks, or bankrupt companies even after the bank itself is gone. Recovery also takes some time. Assets have to be sold, debts have to be settled, legal processes grind forward. While insured customers move on, uninsured depositors can wait months or even years to learn how much they'll recover, if anything. So while the system protects the average person, it doesn't protect everyone equally. Bank runs don't just destroy banks. They can have lasting effects on people, businesses, and the economy. Some people walk away almost untouched. Others lose savings they spent a lifetime building. The U.S. job market is circling the drain, and people know it. When the New York Fed asked consumers in December of 2025 about their chances of finding a job in the next 3 months should they lose their current job, they said just 43%. That's the lowest in 12 years. And it's not just talk. Job openings in the U.S. dropped by more than 380,000, down to 6.54 million. The lowest since September 2020 when the COVID pandemic hit hard. But these numbers don't actually tell us what's wrong. Hi, Josh here, and on today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're going to reveal why it's so hard to find a job right now. Chapter 1. Tariffs. One of the biggest economic shocks of 2025 came when the U.S. slapped a wide range of tariffs on both rivals and allies. The aim was to boost domestic production and reduce trade deficits. It didn't work. Tariffs are essentially a tax on imports, and in this case, the U.S. paid the price. Small businesses felt the pinch, and slower hiring quickly became one of the biggest casualties. The unemployment rate climbed over 0.4 percentage points over the course of 2025 to 4.4%. But here's a deeper problem, one that could hit far harder than anyone expected. Tariffs aren't that unusual. They're one of the most common economic tools in the world, used by every major power. Sure, they can shake things up in the short term, but over time, the economy usually finds its balance and stabilizes. The problem with these more recent U.S. tariffs is that they're anything but stable. The tariff policy has been shifting constantly in the recent years. The latest projections hit lower-income Americans the hardest, pushing the average federal tax rate for the bottom 20% up by 1.9 percentage points, more than the wealthier households. In response to uncertainty, small businesses tend to avoid taking risks, and economic experts across the board think this is a factor in why it's so hard to find a job these days. Sean Snaith, economist and director of the University of Central Florida's Institute for Economic Forecasting, said, "There's no compelling reason to be out there hiring en masse. That is a rational response when you're dealing with this kind of uncertainty." Adding to this, Dean Baker, senior economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, said, "Companies are seeing higher prices, depressing profitability. They're hesitant because tariffs make a lot of investments that have been profitable unprofitable, and often new hires who need weeks or months of training before they can truly contribute end up feeling just like another risky investment." Few people are likely to be feeling the sting of tariffs on their employment prospects quite as much as the graduating class of 2025, about 2 million students. Back in fall 2024, employers were optimistic, saying they planned to hire 7.3% more graduates than the year before. But by 2025, that hope had almost vanished, dropping to just 0.6%. And it's getting worse. The cruel irony is that the tariffs were supposed to help the American manufacturing industry, but those jobs were some of the hardest hit. Prices for key raw materials shot up, forcing factories to cut back and scale down their workforces instead. But tariffs aren't the only economic buzzword standing between you and a job right now. Chapter 2. Inflation. For the last 12 months, inflation in the U.S. has floated between 2.3% and around 3%, but those seemingly small numbers hide the real cost, hurting the average American household's wallet and forcing small businesses to rethink hiring altogether. According to the payment processor ADP, American businesses with fewer than 50 members of staff collectively shed 120,000 positions in November of 2025 alone. When costs rise, it often makes more sense for businesses to have employees wear multiple hats rather than hiring anyone new. One small business owner said, "In a normal year, we'd hire 10 to 15, and this year we're closer to 4 or 5. We're definitely seeing more thoughtful spending." Rising costs often force businesses to cut hours, leaving employees, many juggling multiple jobs, competing for the hours that are left. And while small businesses are being bled by inflation, large businesses have been slashing their own workforces. And it's all because of their own actions during the pandemic. Back in 2020, tech and tech-adjacent companies went on a hiring spree, worried about running out of skilled labor and losing their edge. Now, those bloated workforces are drowning these mega companies in expenses, and they are scrambling to shift the cost elsewhere. So what happens when the hiring boom turns into a cost crisis? In 2025, Amazon cut around 14,000 jobs and announced another 16,000 in January 2026, trimming roughly a tenth of its corporate workforce. Pinterest is slashing 15% of its staff, and UPS, after already cutting nearly 50,000 jobs in 2025, signaled another 30,000 are on the way. There is nothing unique about these companies, they all just seem to be reflecting wider macroeconomic trends for slimmed-down workforces. Needless to say, this doesn't make it seem like major companies will be going on hiring sprees anytime soon. Tariffs and inflation are major forces tearing through today's hiring market, but sharp-eyed observers have noticed something missing from the conversation, a looming shadow that could have an even bigger impact on your job prospects than either of them. Chapter 3. AI. We mentioned earlier that 2025 is when things started to get remarkably bad for the post-pandemic era. The government first reported 584,000 new jobs for 2025, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics later revised the total to only 181,000, showing the year's hiring was far weaker than initially reported. Compare that to the 2 million jobs added in 2024. It's no coincidence that this started getting so bad just as AI truly began proliferating into every corner of culture. Remember Pinterest's 15% staff reduction? That's another round of cuts explicitly tied to AI, with the company stating in a filing that it is prioritizing AI-powered products and capabilities. If you've been wondering why Pinterest feels noticeably worse later, then that might explain part of it. And it's not alone. Other major tech and communications giants like Verizon are making similar moves. Just months after Verizon announced 13,000 job cuts in November 2025, CEO Dan Schulman said, "If you say to your employees there's not going to be any job disruption, I think you lose all credibility. All of them get that there is going to be. A year from now, it's going to be radically different. Machines can do most anything we do better than we can do it." Just months after the company announced 13,000 job cuts. Goldman Sachs has taken to calling this new form of economic weirdness jobless growth. AI developments have allowed companies to increase shareholder value while cutting their workforces. It results in the macro trend of economic growth and unemployment at the same time. Sachs has been pretty consistent doomsayers with just how disruptive the AI boom could be for job seekers. They project it could eliminate 5,000 to 10,000 jobs every single month, potentially rising to 20,000 per month by the end of 2026. If they're right, 6 to 7% of all jobs could ultimately disappear because of AI. And they're not the only ones ringing the alarm bells. Assistant professor at University College Dublin, Konstantin Berge, said that AI and the jobs lost because of it might represent a fundamental economic restructuring. What does that mean? In his own words, it can be a couple of months, it can also be a couple of years. If the jobs are really lost due to outsourcing or AI, then unless we find we still need those people and replacing them didn't work, then those jobs are gone. It's a terrifying thought. If companies believe that they can make more money while paying fewer people, history suggests they'll keep doing it. But the idea that this trend can continue indefinitely is highly questionable. Laura Ulrich, director of economic research at Indeed, said, "Having a very low hire, low fire, low quits environment in a period of economic growth can only last so long." But is that true, or is it more false hope? If the AI bubble bursts, as many have predicted, it's likely to completely reshuffle the circumstances. But since the US economy is so deeply tied to that bubble, any burst could trigger ripple effects in the job market. Exactly what those effects will be is uncertain. Tariffs, inflation, and AI form a brutal trifecta for job seekers right now, but there's another huge factor, and it hits much closer to home. Chapter 4. Actually getting hired can be a nightmare. Does any of this feel familiar? An entry-level job that requires 3 to 5 years of experience to actually apply for. The endless rounds of interviews and tryouts, knowing that at any stage you could still be cut from the roster. Everything seems fine, and then suddenly you're ghosted, or you get an email saying hundreds of highly qualified candidates applied for the same role. The fact is, even when you find a position that's open today, actually getting the job can feel like an insurmountable task. Because of all the factors discussed in the previous chapters, the competition for jobs has never been higher. And now there are AI job applying services that will find open postings and even auto-generate cover letters. Most of these applications are low quality, but they still add to the slush pile, making it far less likely your resume ever reaches the desk of a hiring manager. With 80 to over 100 active applications, even getting a chance to hear back can be tough. Some applicants describe the process feeling like a full-time job most of the time. Studies have shown that between 2023 and 2024, the number of applications for the average job posting have increased by 44%, while the number of interviews in response has stayed the same. And the real reasons behind this are even more hidden and far more troubling. There's a phenomenon that some are calling ghost jobs, a strange trend that some researchers first noticed back in 2018. 1 in 5 jobs didn't actually result in a hire, and this actually has gotten worse over time, with 4 in 10 companies in 2024 reporting posting fake or inactive job listings and giving all job searchers false hope. Why are they doing this? Jeffrey Scott, senior content manager and hiring manager at Resume Genius, said, "Ghost jobs are actually not scams. They are from real companies, but they are not actually hiring for that role at this moment in time. They might be interested in hiring for that role in the future, or maybe they were hiring for it, but due to budget cuts, those roles were closed or put on hold." Whether ghost jobs are an innocent mistake or an investment in the future, or just a way to look successful, they're another dead end giving desperate job seekers false hope. And it creates macro problems too, because ghost jobs make it harder for the government bodies to effectively gather data on the labor market. But there's still plenty of data that will shock you. In 2025, according to the Labor Department, 1.7 million of the overall 7 million unemployed people in the US had been actively searching for a job for over 6 months. The loss of entry-level jobs combined with ever higher experience requirements is closing doors for more and more people, especially those who can't somehow slip into a timeless pocket dimension to get extra work done. In some cases, only 30% of graduating classes are able to get jobs in the industry that they trained in. In September 2025, the rates of unemployment for recent college grads reached a depressing 9.7%. Nick Tremper, senior economic analyst at Gusto, has said, "Folks are kind of just sitting still. They're not looking for new roles, they're not leaving their current roles. Without these new jobs available, it's hard for an entry-level employee to get their foot in the door and start their career." With fewer and fewer jobs being created thanks to cost-cutting and AI, the biggest hope for a new position opening is someone quitting. But because the job market is such a cold fish right now, when someone has a job, they tend to hold on to it. Fewer people are quitting than ever, valuing job security in a chaotic world. And unless your position is being cut from a large company, you're also less likely to be fired. Most small businesses don't want to risk hiring a lesser employee or mounting costs in the rehiring process. These 4 umbrellas cover most of the horrors that make the modern American job market so difficult to navigate. So the question is, will things get better? If you're an extreme optimist, you might hope that after the initial frustrations, tariffs will spark a boom in U.S. manufacturing jobs and bring an end to outsourcing. But if companies can save money and boost profits for executives and shareholders, they will. And the imagined apple pie America of the 1950s isn't coming back.
In 2033, your Social Security could get cut permanently. Not by a little, 21% of it gone. That's over $18,000 per household, money you were counting on for rent, healthcare, and survival. And the worst part, even delaying retirement won't save you. I'm Josh, and on today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're explaining what happens if Social Security runs out and you can't retire. How can a country that pulls in over $1 trillion a year in taxes have a law that sends millions into poverty overnight? To see why, we need to understand how the math behind retirement broke, the inverted pyramid. It should have been the perfect system, a pay-as-you-go conveyor belt where younger workers pour taxes into the system on one end and the retirees who've done their time in the labor mines collected on the other. When you age out of work, you move toward the pickup end of the conveyor belt, and the new generation of workers starts to pay in to take your place. If you want to get a bit more specific, the money comes partly from investment income and taxes that retirees pay on their benefits, but most of it comes from a dedicated 12.4% payroll tax that is evenly split by employees and employers. It seems like as long as time kept marching forward, there wouldn't be any problems. The 69 million Americans in the system would continue getting their full checks every month, including the 22 million that would fall below the poverty line without their full check. And then the system started to crumble. Part of the reason is the factor making all of our lives a little bit harder every day: inflation and stagnant wages. There's also another popular boogeyman that they're tied to: declining birth rates. The U.S. has seen a downward birth trend since the 2000s, hitting its lowest ever birth rate in 2024. Thankfully, we are not facing total population collapse. The birth rate is still above the death rate, but at 1.6 births per woman, the situation looks pretty dire. For some perspective, at the end of the baby boom era in the early 1960s, the U.S. birth rate was roughly 3.3. A 2013 Gallup poll found the main reasons are worries that people couldn't afford kids, while more recent polls show growing fears of climate change. But whatever the reason, the result is the same. That conveyor belt has turned into a seesaw, and it is dipping dangerously to one end. But the birth rates are actually only a small part of the overall cause. Back in 1983, amendments to the Social Security Act were passed. The aim was to keep the Social Security Trust Fund, the Old Age and Survivors Insurance, or OASI, solvent until around 2058. But there were plenty of problems they didn't anticipate. The protracted impact of the Great Recession in 2008 hammered jobs, crippled the housing market, and fueled a surge in wealth inequality. It was one of the first signs that 2058 might be overly optimistic. Things start getting bad in 2021 when the Great Shortfall began. For the first time since the early 1980s, the payouts of Social Security were bigger than the contributions. It wasn't by some small margin either. It was $56 billion. Just like an unexpected expense a couple of weeks before your payday forces you to dip into your savings, Social Security has its own savings account, the reserve or trust fund. And much like your savings, once this fund is empty, it is empty for good. The problem is, it is running out quicker than anyone expected. Surely the solution here is for the millennials to get busy and start having more kids, right? No, it's not. According to experts like Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works, the population disparity isn't nearly as big of a problem for Social Security as wealth inequality. After all, when paying the 6.2% payroll tax, the lower the average wage for American workers, the smaller their collective contribution to Social Security. And if you're thinking, surely the gap is covered when millionaires and billionaires pay their payroll tax? Well, if you thought that, clearly you thought further ahead than the U.S. government, who put a cap on the taxable wealth for Social Security. In 2025, it was $176,100. The future might be looking bleak, but at least you can like, share, and subscribe.
It might be the only thing getting you through your non-retirement. But what does all this actually mean? Everyone earning less than $176,100 is still paying 6.2%, which shrinks in value as inflation rises. Meanwhile, millionaires and billionaires keep consolidating their wealth but never pay more than 6.2% on that $176,100 cap. In the good old days, Social Security captured and taxed 90% of the average wages. Thanks to growing wealth inequality, they now only capture 83%. As the analysts at Transamerica put it, the top 6% of workers rose 62% more than the price inflation, while wages for the other 94% grew by just 17%. That is horrible news for Social Security. Since 1983, this slippage has drained Social Security by $1.4 trillion, which economically speaking is a staggering amount of money. Which brings us back to the percentage cut. Like we said earlier, it is nonsense to think that checks will immediately go to zero. That's just fear-mongering, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be afraid. No matter what, Social Security needs to make those payouts to everyone that they owe them to, no picking or choosing. But once the trust fund is gone, there are no easy direct bailouts or alternative funding sources other than the depleted contributions. That means that when the fund runs dry in 2033, the remaining money will need to be stretched, resulting in an average pay cut of 19 to 23% depending on who you ask. Imagine your job just told you you'd have to take a pay cut, losing a fifth of your income, while all of your living costs stay the same. This is the barrel of the gun that America's retirees are currently staring down. The government is currently pulling back the hammer. In previous generations, proportionally, we saw as many as 5 workers making contributions to support every one retiree. Now it's only 3, and in the future it's likely to shrink to 2. Think of it like a train carrying heavy cargo. The train and its engines are the workers, and the cargo its retirees. 5 engines carrying a heavy load is light work. 2 engines and a heavier load than ever, and it makes you wonder how long this train could even run. Holding off retirement until you're even older might seem like a solution to this. You build more savings, ration your payments for the remaining years, and reduce the number of retirees. Wins all around, right? But there is a problem. You're just another brick in the biological wall. You've heard the classic advice that every so-called financial guru says, just delay your retirement until you're 70. The earliest you could start claiming Social Security benefits is 62, but your benefit would be about 30% less than if you waited for full retirement age at 67. If you wait even longer until 70, your benefit will be exactly 24% higher than if you retired at 67. It is a persuasive idea, so much so that CNBC has reported that around 70% of Americans have considered delaying retirement. But while that idea is sound, it doesn't mean that your body will be. According to a 2025 survey, health troubles are the main reason almost 56% of middle-aged workers in the United States retire earlier than planned. Those health troubles only compound the older you get. Just because you plan to retire later for economic reasons, it doesn't mean your body will hold up, or that you won't face the kind of corporate ageism that makes employers hesitant to hire someone in their late 60s. This is a particularly tough spot for people who work physically demanding jobs, who typically earn less and therefore would gain more from delaying retirement, but they're less likely to be able to due to the demands of the job and the toll that working it would take on their bodies. In the brutal words of Teresa Ghilarducci, a professor of economics and policy analysis at the New School for Social Research, the labor market doesn't always want you when you want the labor market. And of course, there is that other, much more depressing reason that late retirement is a wolf in sheep's clothing, the ultimate biological wall. Death. Even though life expectancy for Americans is as high as it's ever been, that still doesn't leave you with a great-looking number when the reaper comes knocking. If you manage to survive to age 70, the data shows the average man will live almost 14 more years. A woman will live another 16 years. That means even if you delay retirement until 70, you still have to stretch those savings across a decade and a half of rising medical costs before they become inheritance. This kicks off what we like to call the decay spiral, the ultimate grim result of being financially unable to retire but physically unable to work. The little money you have is put in direct confrontation with all of the rising costs of getting old, from health to home maintenance. It's like there's a monster slowly eating you from the feet up. You know it's happening, but there's almost nothing you could do. This might all sound like we're entering a nightmare, but no, the truth is we're waking up from a nice cozy nap to the cold hard reality. The end of retirement is not a glitch in the system. That changes how you should be thinking about your money right now.
For most of human history, we've been worked like horses until we dropped. The social safety net that guarantees security for the elderly has only existed for the last century. But by 2033, that net is breaking, and what will we be left tumbling toward? With a 21% social security cut draining your income and your body no longer able to fill the gap, where you put your remaining cash becomes everything, because the worst place you can keep it right now is exactly where the banks want you to leave it. The United States owes more money than any country on the earth, a staggering $38 trillion. China isn't far behind with over $15 trillion. The total global debt, $251 trillion. In fact, every single country on the earth is in debt, and we'll show you how that's possible. Think about this for a second. If you gathered every euro, dollar, yen, and renminbi on the entire planet, it still wouldn't be enough to pay off all the debt the nations of the world hold. Impossible? Maybe, but it's true. According to the IMF, global debt now tops 235% of global GDP. That's more than twice everything in the world produces in a year. In simple terms, GDP is like the world's yearly paycheck. If your personal debt were 235% of your annual income, you'd be buried. And that is exactly where the global economy is standing today. But this didn't happen overnight. Massive pandemic spending, over a decade of low interest rates, persistent government deficits averaging around 5% of GDP, and the heavy financialization of modern economies all pushed borrowing higher year after year. And yet, most people barely notice. Now here is where things get weird. People assume debt is limited by how much money actually exists. But money and debt are not the same thing. Money is what you see in wallets and bank accounts. Debt is a promise to pay money in the future, usually with interest attached. In modern banking, most money is created through lending. When a bank issues a loan, it doesn't pull cash from some vault. It creates new digital money and a matching debt. And that means every loan adds more debt, but not necessarily more money. Over time, debt grows faster than the money supply, and that's because every dollar created through credit comes with a promise to repay plus interest. So when people ask, why can't we just take all the money on the earth and pay off the debt? Well, the answer is simple. Most of the money in existence was created through debt, and interest ensures the total owed is always bigger than the money available to pay it back. And this is what makes the situation feel unsettling. Global debt isn't shrinking in any meaningful way. Governments continue to borrow to fund social programs, military budgets, infrastructure, and crisis responses. Meanwhile, companies and households rely on credit to operate in the modern economy. Borrowing isn't the exception anymore, it's the rule, which leads to a much bigger question. If every country is in debt and global debt exceeds all the money on Earth, who exactly are they borrowing from? Which nations are carrying the most dangerous levels of debt? And who actually sits at the top of the global debt leaderboard? And it's not who you think. When most people think about debt, they think about household debt. You imagine a family taking out a mortgage or a credit card bill that needs to be repaid. But countries are fundamentally very different from households. Households live limited lives. Parents retire, people pass away, businesses close. Countries, on the other hand, are technically immortal. They don't have a lifespan that ends with retirement or inheritance. A nation continues indefinitely, which means its financial strategies can be very different from those of a family balancing a budget. One of the core reasons a country can carry enormous debt without collapsing is that many governments issue debt in the currency they themselves control. For example, the United States borrows by selling bonds in US dollars. Because it controls its own currency and the central bank can create more dollars, the risk of default on that domestic debt is extremely low, compared with countries that borrow in foreign currencies. But not every nation is so lucky. This contrasts sharply with countries in the European Union. Nations like Italy, Greece, and Spain share the euro, which isn't controlled by their governments, but by the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. That means when Italy issues debt, it borrows in a currency it can't create. Without control over the money supply, Eurozone countries can't simply print euros to pay debts. And this raises the risk of default and forces them to make tough financial choices. This arrangement was widely cited as a key cause of the European sovereign debt crisis. Nations struggled to refinance or manage debts because they lacked control over their own monetary policy. And it gets worse. In many developing economies, countries lack stable financial markets or widely trusted local currencies. To attract international investors, they often issue sovereign bonds in foreign currencies, usually US dollars. Issuing bonds in foreign currencies might make them more attractive to investors, but it comes with big risks. If a country borrows in a currency it doesn't control, it has to earn or buy those dollars through exports or foreign investment just to cover interest. And that leaves them vulnerable to sudden shocks nobody can predict. Even with all these differences between countries, sovereign debt is a whole other level compared to personal or corporate debt. Miss a credit card payment and maybe your interest rates go up or your credit score takes a hit. But if a country defaults, there is no global court to make them pay. You can't just seize their assets overseas, and there's no bankruptcy judge to sort things out. Resolving a sovereign default can take years, involving negotiations with banks, international lenders, and sometimes entire blocks of countries. And the consequences hit ordinary people hard: recessions, mass unemployment, and cuts to public services, all while political tensions rise. It's like a domino effect with real lives on the line. Take Lebanon, for example. After its 2020 debt default, the country spent years trying to negotiate with creditors, but with little progress. Meanwhile, the economy stayed depressed. Inflation and unemployment shot up, and public services kept on getting worse. It just shows how long and messy sovereign debt restructurings can be, and how tough it is for countries that rely on foreign financing but can't get access to international markets. In some cases, defaults are triggered not by economic mismanagement alone. Russia's partial default in June 2022 was largely driven by economic sanctions following its invasion of Ukraine. This blocked foreign investors from getting payments in US dollars. Russia's default wasn't because it couldn't pay, it was because outside restrictions stopped the money from flowing. And that is why sovereign defaults are usually a last resort. So if countries aren't like households, why then do they borrow so much in the first place? It's mostly about managing growth and keeping economies stable. Governments use debt to fund investment, infrastructure, respond to crises like pandemics or wars, and smooth out economic ups and downs. Borrowing often makes sense when the alternative is stagnation, unemployment, or social unrest. But there's a catch: not all debt is created equal. How risky it is depends on currency control, international markets, and politics. Larger nations with strong institutions and their own money can handle much more debt than smaller or less developed countries. Whether a country borrows in its own currency or someone else's makes a huge difference in how risky that debt really is. But that is just the setup. Next, we'll look at which countries have piled up the most debt compared to the size of their economies. And the number one spot might surprise you. To see how stretched a country's finances really are, economists don't just look at raw debt numbers. That is where the debt-to-GDP ratio comes in. It compares a country's debt to the size of its economy, and it usually is shown as a percentage. In simple terms, it shows how much a country owes compared to what it produces. A ratio of 100% means the government owes as much as its entire economy produces in a year. 150% means it owes 1.5 times that. You can also think of it as how many years it would take to pay off the debt if the country devoted its entire GDP to it. It's obviously impossible, but it gives you a sense of the scale. The higher the debt-to-GDP ratio climbs, the harder it is for a country to meet its obligations without raising taxes, cutting spending, inflating the currency, or restructuring debt. Economists suggest that countries with ratios above 77% for long periods often see slower economic growth. This can hurt wages, investment, and productivity. Higher ratios can also shake investor confidence and make borrowing more expensive, making future debt even tougher to manage. And that is why numbers alone don't tell the full story. This ratio also helps to explain why the biggest debtor isn't always the most dangerous. The United States may owe the most in raw dollars, but it also has the largest economy to support that debt. The U.S. finances its obligations through Treasury securities, widely considered to be the safest bonds in the world. A large, trusted economy can sustain more debt than a small or unstable one, but even then the ratio still matters because interest costs go up as debt piles up. Now let's meet the countries that really push the limits. And this is where things start to get a little uncomfortable. The 10th highest debt-to-GDP ratio belongs to the United Kingdom at about 101.29%. That means the UK government owes slightly more than its entire economy produces in 1 year. Crossing the 100% line is psychologically important for markets. It signals a nation is now leveraged beyond its annual output. In 9th is Spain with roughly 101.82%. Spain's ratio reflects years of recovery from financial crises and pandemic-era borrowing. Debt rose faster than growth, tightening future fiscal flexibility. At number 8, Belgium sits at around 104.47%. The country has carried high public debt for decades. Keeping investors confident means it has to consistently bring in enough revenue just to cover the rising interest costs. At number 7, Canada posts about 110.77%. Canada's borrowing surged during COVID stabilization programs, but even with a strong economy, servicing debt above 110% of GDP requires sustained growth to avoid long-term pressure. At number 6, France reaches roughly 113.11%. France's high social spending and large public sector has contributed to persistent deficits, pushing its debt load well above its annual output. At number 5, the United States stands near 120.79%. Even with the world's largest economy, a ratio above 120% means interest payments alone consume a growing share of the federal budget. The U.S. benefits from issuing the world's reserve currency, but it's important to point out that currently debt is compounding faster than growth. At number 4, Italy climbs to about 135.33%. Italy's situation has economists worried because it borrows in a currency it does not control directly, the euro. This limits its ability to manage crises using monetary policy and exposes it to market pressures during downturn. At number 3, Greece comes in at around 150.89%. Greece's debt crisis showed how quickly markets can panic when a nation's debt grows far beyond its productive capacity. This has forced bailouts and years of economic contraction. At number 2, Venezuela reaches approximately 164.27%. Venezuela's debt problem is compounded by inflation, collapsing production, and political instability. It makes repayment far more dangerous than the number alone suggests. And here is where the tension really builds, because everything you've just heard still isn't at the top. One country's debt to GDP ratio even tops 164%, and it is Japan. Its ratio sits at around 236%, meaning the government owes more than twice what the entire country produces in a year. Some measures put it closer to 195% in 2023, which was already the highest among major advanced economies. Either way, Japan isn't just high on the list, it is in a league of its own. To put that into perspective, imagine someone earning $50,000 a year, but owing more than $118,000 in credit cards, loans, and mortgages, and then having to keep borrowing just to get by. That's basically what a 236% debt to GDP ratio looks like at the national level. Japan's government owes so much that even years of its entire economic output wouldn't be enough to pay it off without constant growth and refinancing. Every year is a delicate balancing act. So how did Japan end up here? Japan didn't get into this situation because of one big mistake. It is decades of slow structural pressure. Most of its debt comes from persistent fiscal deficits combined with near-zero economic growth over long periods. When a government spends more than it collects year after year, debt just keeps increasing. And if growth stays weak, the economy can't expand fast enough to handle all of that borrowing. And that is where demographics come into play. One of the biggest factors is Japan's population. By the mid-1970s, fertility had already fallen below the replacement level of 2.1 kids per woman, and it keeps declining. At that same time, life expectancy kept rising. The result? A rapidly aging society with fewer workers supporting more retirees. In 2001, about 18.4% of Japan's population was aged 65 or older. By 2024, that share had grown to 30.2%. Projections show it could reach 36.7% by 2045. That means more than 1 out of every 3 people in Japan will be at retirement age. A looming demographic time bomb. An aging population creates a brutal feedback loop for national debt. Fewer workers means less tax revenue coming in. More retirees means more government spending going out on pensions, healthcare, and social services. To fill that gap, the government borrows, but as debt grows and interest costs rise, and when growth is slow, there is no easy way to escape the cycle. Japan also spent heavily for decades trying to boost its economy. After asset bubbles burst in the 1990s, growth stalled. To avoid collapse, the government ramped up its spending, and the central bank pushed interest rates near zero. Cheap borrowing made the debt feel manageable, but it quietly let total obligations balloon. Over time, running deficits became normal. Stopping suddenly could have sparked recession, unemployment, or social unrest. What makes Japan really interesting is that, despite its massive debt-to-GDP ratio, it hasn't collapsed. Most of its debt is held domestically and issued in the yen, a currency it controls. That gives policymakers the flexibility to refinance, stabilize bond markets, and avoid a sudden default. But that doesn't change the math. With a ratio of near 236%, Japan has to keep rolling over huge amounts of debt just to stay afloat. Any shock to growth, inflation, or confidence could make things much worse. This is exactly why the debt-to-GDP leaderboard matters more than raw numbers. The United States may owe more dollars overall, but Japan owes far more relative to the size of its economy. Its number 1 spot shows how debt can quietly become structural rather than temporary, baked into demographics, slow growth, and government obligations instead of just crisis spending. And that brings us to the extreme opposite. There's a country that operates at the opposite extreme. A nation that doesn't just have low debt, it has practically no national debt at all. And that country is Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein doesn't issue sovereign bonds and it doesn't carry a standing national debt like almost every other country. In practical terms, its government runs debt-free. Any obligations it does have are short-term operational ones. There's no long-term debt to roll over year after year. A true anomaly in the world of global finance. So how is that even possible? The answer lies in scale, structure, and income. Liechtenstein is one of the smallest countries on the earth, with a population under 40,000 people. But despite its size, it's one of the wealthiest nations per capita in the world. The economy is built around high-value manufacturing, specialized industrial exports, and financial services. The country consistently runs balanced budgets or surpluses, meaning government spending is covered by current revenues rather than borrowing against the future. Liechtenstein also benefits from being closely integrated with Switzerland. It uses the Swiss franc, one of the world's most stable currencies, without needing its own central bank or debt markets. That removes a lot of the pressure that drives bigger countries to run deficits and issue bonds. Most importantly, Liechtenstein doesn't face the same demands as large nations. It has no military, minimal infrastructure needs, and a super efficient public sector. With steady revenue and limited obligations, borrowing simply is not necessary. Of course, this isn't a model that scales. Liechtenstein can operate without debt precisely because it is small, wealthy, and specialized. Large countries with millions of citizens, aging populations, global military commitments, and complex economies cannot function in the same way without borrowing. And that is the real lesson. Global debt isn't an accident, it is built into the way modern economies work. Whether that debt becomes dangerous doesn't just depend on how much is owed, but on who owes it and how they borrow and what kind of future they're betting on. Now watch What If the US Economy Crashes, or check out this video instead.